Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the NEPA's Geography CSEC Seminar 2023. Welcome all the guests online and everybody in studio with us here today. So we have a very exciting program planned for you, and I know that especially our students are going to appreciate this program very, very much. So, but before we get into our presentations, I have to give you a little bit of background on what the seminar is exactly, right? So the NEPA CSEC Student Seminar is aimed at providing participants with information and resources to assist with the completion of CSEC school-based assessments for the sciences, preferably geography at this point in time, right? Because that's what we're focusing on. The seminar also contributes to one of the agency's core functions, which is public education and outreach. This will be our 7th staging of the seminar, which has been held previously in Kingston and St. Andrew, Manchester, St. Anne, and St. James. For the last 2 years, we have gone virtual, and the webinar is open to all schools, students, and teachers at the 4th and 5th form level who have an interest in learning about the types of resources available from NEPA to assist in their CSEC SBA papers, how to access those available resources, and on the scope and function of the National Environment and Planning Agency. So while COVID was bad, I mean, it opened up where we could have webinars to everybody. So instead of going to a particular parish, we're actually open to everybody else. So a little one tick for COVID there, I guess. The program really is starting now, and we're hoping to end at 12. But in that process and in that time, we want to give you enough information that can assist you and can help you. So in the first half of our program, we'll be having presentations from NEPA officers as well as officers from the Discovery Bay Marine Lab Center for Sciences at the University of the West Indies, Mona. So the presentations will entail accessing NEPA's resources, air quality, and mangroves. So that is in the first section of our group of presentations. And after our little break, we will have presentations on water quality, coral reef, and tips on how to do your school-based assessment. But before we actually get into all of that, I need to give you some housekeeping matters. So the webinar is being recorded and live streamed to Affinity, YouTube channel, and you can find the name Itinerary. That's how you find it. So if you want to share that information to other persons, they can just type in Itinerary, and they will find that on the YouTube channel and join us. You will notice everyone's mics are muted and cameras are off. This is intentional to keep the focus on the presenters. At the end, when we have our question and answers, you will have an opportunity to open your mics and your cameras to ask those questions. And for persons who do not have access to mics, you can type your question in the chat and we will read those questions for you. So please, we're asking you, this is the internet and we know that sometimes things happen. So if you are experiencing technical difficulties, we're just asking you to put a note in the chat and we will see how best we can assist you to get those sorted out. You may use the question and answer feature to ask questions, and these will be addressed as soon as possible and in a timely manner as well, because we want to stay within a time. We know that everyone really and truly is busy these days, but we want our students to get as much as possible out of this session. And the recording of this session will be available on the NEPA's YouTube channel, which is at NEPA. So after the session, you can look out for the recording of this session in the event somebody missed these presentations and you just want to do a little quick recap before you do your SBAs, right? When you're asking questions, since your mics are muted and your camera is off, we're just going to ask you to use the raise hand feature at the bottom of your screen. And when you're acknowledged, you can just open your mic and your camera, and we will go ahead and ask that question. All right. So we're just going to get into the meat of the matter right now. And our first presentation is from our senior librarian, Miss Charlotte Thomas. Ms. Thomas is the senior librarian here, as I said before, at the Sharon O'Connor Documentation Centre. She holds a bachelor's in language communication and society and a master's of library in information studies from the University of the West Indies. She has experience in fields of teaching, customer service, and librarianship. Her area of specialization includes working with special collections, cataloging and classification, research, and reference work. Her professional interests include information literacy and information management. In addition, she is very passionate about advocacy and national development. So let us get our pens ready and our pencils and our books and get ready to hear what Miss Charlotte have for us this morning.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you again for carving out this time to come be with us today for us to assist you in completing your SBA. So I have a quick PowerPoint I just want to go through here today so that you know the different resources that we have here at NEPA that can assist you in completing your assignment. So firstly, today we want to go over objectives. So we'll be going over NEPA's roles and functions and the services offered by the Sharon O'Connor Documentation Centre. And this is a special library that is assigned at the National Environment and Planning Agency. And we also want to go over a few tips on how to conduct your research. So we're going over the core functions of the National Environment and Planning Agency. And our core function as an agency is to conserve and protect the Jamaica's natural and built environment. We also offer applications management, environmental management, compliance and enforcement. We also do spatial planning, policy and research to help, with the national development and the different projects and so forth. And one of the main things that we're doing here today, which is public education. So that is why we're at this seminar today, to provide you with the information that you need to do your SBAs. And so we have several resources that you can access through NEPA, and it covers a wide range of information, such as information on climate change, coastal degradation, coral reefs reports, monitoring reports, water quality reports, air quality reports, maps, deforestation, parish profiles, and environmental impact assessment. And the environmental impact assessment is very useful as useful information that you can use as it relates to your SBAs. We also do policies, standards, laws, and regulations and guidelines. As an agency, NEPA is key in developing these things as it relates to Jamaica in terms of the planning and protecting of the environment. So that's also a part of the portfolio that we do here. And we also have information on the state of environment. We also have newspaper clippings database. With the newspaper clipping database, like anything that has happened as it relates to environment within the past, something that is very prominent, we would have that in our collection. And so you can access that too as well. And so again, which is why we're here today, to tell you what the different sources are that you can use. So we have our website that has useful information. On the NEPA's website, we have reports, policies, plans, legislation, and standards, as well as other things that can be accessed through the website. There are other libraries that you can get information from. And further in the presentation, we will go over that. And we have the access to information, which is a way in which you can get information being published by the agency that we will also go into further. So we have several services that are being offered by the Documentation Center that you can access and you can use. We offer referral services. So if it is that we are unable to provide you with the information that you require, we're able to give you a referral to some other agency or another institution that would be able to provide that information. As I was mentioning earlier, we do have our newspaper clippings that is also a useful source of information. And we also conduct interviews. As it relates to the interviews, we require that you send the information ahead of time so that the questions rather ahead of time so that we can pass it on to our technical officers for them to go ahead and do the answering. And in regard to the interview, we recommend that you do this on a timely manner because we have to provide the information to the technical officers for them to answer. So if it is that you know that you're on a timeline, ensure that you try to get these questions in as early as possible so that that information can be provided. So we also offer Wi-Fi services in the event that you do come into our spaces. We do open to the public. However, we ask that you contact ahead of time so that we can set an appointment, or if you have something that you're looking for so that we can look through to have that prepared. We also do reprographic services, photocopies, scanning, and so forth. And also, we facilitate with the help and aid of our technical officers water quality testing. And we also offer maps, and those are also at a cost. And so in order for you, to access our information, you need to know to contact us. So you can contact us via telephone, and our numbers are running on the screen, and also via email and via our website. And so you're seeing that contact information on the screen, which is the email address and or website details. And another thing that we want to just go over a few tips here with you as it relates to writing your SBAs, which is the crux of the matter, so why you're here today. So a few suggested tips that I want to go over with you here today. So first and foremost, in order to adequately, write a good SBA or one that would get you the grade that you're looking for, is to firstly understand what is required of you. So you have to know exactly what you should be doing, what topic it is that you're doing, and ensure that you have an understanding of what is required. And then based on your understanding, then we can go from there, right? And so now that you've understood what it is that is required of you, we recommend that you create a checklist of the list of things that is required to get this task completed. And so as you complete each task, you can go ahead and tick them off. And once you're in this process of, compiling your SBA and getting everything together, we also recommend that you proofread. From time to time, you may read something or write something, and you may miss an error here and there. And usually it's recommended that once you're writing any paper that you write it and have it sit for a while and then reread. Because sometimes in the moment you don't necessarily find the mistakes, but in going back over after sitting it down for a while, you may pick up additional error. Another thing that we recommend is that you create an action plan, which is inclusive of timelines to ensure that you're on target. So if you know that you have a specific deadline, if it is supposed to be given in a particular month, you go ahead and create a timeline for each aspect and each phase of your SBA to ensure that you're getting everything done in a timely manner. Ensure also that you prepare multiple drafts and try to get feedback on these drafts. So if your teacher is a teacher who's able to say, okay, if you give me a first draft, I'll go through it. If it is you're doing it in a timely manner, I would recommend that you definitely make use of that. And I know that we're in the age of information overload, technology, everything. It's always recommended that you have backups of your work and have backups to the backup. Who knows, right? Just to ensure that if in the event, say, for example, your computer fails or your flash drive fails, you have another copy. It's recommended that you email it to yourself, or if you are able to store it in the cloud, just to be on the safe side. Also, we ask that you cite your sources properly to ensure that persons are getting the credit that they deserve. And so if you have any questions, read the resources that we have at the Documentation Center or anything of the sort. Again, here is our contact information on the screen, which is our Doc Center email, our PubEd email, and the telephone number along with the extensions. And as I'd mentioned earlier before, the ATI, which is access to information, and the specific extension that is associated with that. And also some of useful information for you to note, seeing that we want you to be able to know what we have here, depending on what your SBA is about. So you can say, okay, this is what I can find at NEPA and so forth. So this on the screen is beach erosion monitoring site, and these are the different locations that you're able to get information for and the parishes that are aligned. So if it is that you're in any of those parishes and you're interested in getting these kinds of information or reports, these are some of the locations that we monitor along with the parishes associated with it. I'm going to have it stay on the screen just for a quick second so that you can just browse it quickly. And also, we do have air quality reports in our collection. And the areas that we do have reports on, we have for Washington Gardens, Spanish Town Road, Portmore, Spanish Town, Mandeville, Montego Bay, Constant Spring, Maypen, Crossroads. And we have available maps. And these are the kinds of maps that we have available, which is the air quality, emission sources, beaches, public and private. We have garbage dumps or landfill, which is solid waste management watersheds, NWC wastewater plants, water quality monitoring sites and status, water quality freshwater marine, and the list goes on. We have the state of Sandy Beach monitored by NEPA. We have a freshwater biochemical oxygen demand level. So these are the different maps that we have available in our collection that you're able to access. And we also have an online database. So the online database that we're currently using is COHA. And if you go to our website, which is NEPA, and if you go specifically to the Sharon O'Connor Documentation Centre, there is a link there that you can view the collection. It gives you the option to log in, but you don't necessarily have to log in. There is also a search bar right there where you can put the information in. And for the purpose of this example today, I did a quick search on coral reefs, and these are the different documents that are coming up as it relates to coral reef. And so whatever topics that we have gone through here today, you can search through our collection online by going to our website to see what documents you can find that are accessible to you. And coming up, we have our Access to Information Act. So the Access to Information Act is an act that was put into law in 2002. And so under this program, persons do have the option to get information, to get information under this act. So it gives members of the public the legal right to access official government documents. And so for this, not all of the information or reports that we have may be readily available like that. So you may have to go through the Access to Information Act process to get that information. Again, as it relates to this, we ask that you put your request in early because it may take up to 30 days for you to get a response, and it may even go up to 60 depending on the nature of the request. So again, with this, we ask that you put your submission in early so that whatever happens, you can get the information on a timely manner. There's also a section on our website that is dedicated to the Access to Information and NEPA. And so you can go through the website and you can also see this information on the website as well. And it also gives the details as to how you can go about contacting, whether it be by telephone or if you can send an email, whichever you prefer. And so for the other information sources, we do have partners that we work with. And from time to time, even though we do have a wide array of information reports and things that we offer here, there may be some things that we do not have in our collection readily. And so we have other sources of information or other places that you can get this information from. And if you look on my screen here today, we have that. So you have the Government of Jamaica portal, and the services that are offered is services offered government information on biological diversity. And we also have the Institute of Jamaica. We have Jamaica Open Data Portal. We have the Ministry of Economic Growth and Job Creation, Mines and Geology. We have the Ministry of Health and Wellness. We have National Solid Waste and Authority, and we have ODPM, the Planning Institute of Jamaica. So you see that the list is very extensive. So again, if we don't have it, one of our partners or one of these entities may have that information. So we also recommend that you also check with them too as well. The Water Resources Authority is a good one, and the Urban Development Corporation. And so I'm actually at the end of the presentation here today, but before I go, I just want to leave with you very useful nugget, just a food for thought. And the three that I'm leaving here with you today, two actually, stop for time. So I'm going to go with two. So the first one is Google is not a synonym for research. So we ask that you try to do, your research, whatever it may be. And the last one that I will highlight here today is the more that you read, the more things you will know. The more that you learn, the more places you'll go. And so thank you so much for having me today. But before I go, I have a quick question I want to ask. And you can send a response in the chat. And just to check the temperature to see if you're listening, I would like to ask if someone could just quickly tell me what are one of the ways that they can contact the Documentation Center. And you can put your answer in the chat and we will look at it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Miss Thomas. So while we wait on those persons and we check the chat to see who the winner is, and bear in mind, we have prizes and surprises to give away. So we'll be looking in the chat to see who really and truly answered first and who answered correctly. I must thank Miss Thomas for giving us such wonderful information. And you see the amount of information NEPA have to give, especially on our website. So our website is very important. You can go there at www.nepa.gov.jm and you will get all of your information there. And also access the information. That too is very important. We ask that if you are going through that route, that you do send in your questions and your queries way in advance. Now, we're going to be moving on to Miss Jodianne Minot Marston. She is the coordinator of the air quality branch here at NEPA. So Miss Marston is an environmental professional with over a decade of experience in air quality management. She currently holds a bachelor's in science degree in environmental physics from the University of the West Indies and has had training from the United States Environmental Protection Agency, Air Division. Her current role as a coordinator of the Air Quality Management Branch at NEPA involves conducting ambient air quality monitoring and data assessment, reviewing and preparing technical reports on air quality, preparing standards operating procedures and air quality management plans, providing technical guidance on ambient air quality for policy and legislation development, review, providing program training of junior staff, conducting pollution incident investigations, among other things. And that is a lot. So she has a lot of information to give. She also represents NEPA on a number of technical committees relating to air quality, such as Air Quality Technical Committee. In her spare time, she enjoys gardening and taking time out to enjoy the beauty of the natural environment. So I implore you to, this is the time and this is the moment that you want to write down the information given to you, especially because it will help you with your SBAs. And Miss Marston has questions that, as I said before, you're going to be winning prizes. So I implore you to write down and to get as much information as possible. So make way now for Mrs. Marston.
Thank you, Alicia. Good morning, everyone. Now, I'll just jump straight into the presentation. As Alicia mentioned, I'll be presenting on air quality today. Now, just a brief overview of the presentation. We will look at a few definitions, list some common types of air pollutants, as well as the sources of air pollution. We'll state how weather parameters can affect air pollution, some of the effects of air pollution, as well as how NEPA manages air pollution. We'll also look at some data trends and some ways in which we can limit or prevent air pollution and protect ourselves from exposure. Now, starting with the definition for air pollution. Air pollution is any activity which emits a substance into the air that results in a change to its normal composition and degrades its quality. When we talk about an air pollutant, we are talking about any substance which, when emitted into the air, causes contamination. Air quality is a measure of how clean or polluted the air is. Now you will notice that we have two photos there on the slide, one depicting good air quality, and that refers to an area having little or no air pollutants. And then we have a picture depicting poor air quality, and that would be an area having high concentrations of one or more air pollutants. Now, some common types of air pollutants. Particulate matter, and that is any solid or liquid particle that is suspended in the air. And particulate matter can either be directly emitted, and at that point we call it a primary pollutant, as well as it can be formed through chemical reactions in the air. And at this point we call that pollutant a secondary pollutant. Now, particulate matter can exist in different sizes. We have total suspended particulates, which is usually particulates with a diameter of 100 micrometers or more. We have also particulate matter with a diameter of less than 10 micrometers, and that is referred to as PM10. We also have particulate matter less than 2.5 micrometers, and we refer to that as PM2.5. And these two pollutants are very devastating. And just to give you an idea of what the different pollutants may look like. Now, when we refer to TSP, it can be compared to a grain of sand. So, you know, a grain of sand is fairly heavy, so it won't be transported very far. When we talk about PM10, however, we are talking about a particle that is about 4 to 5 times smaller than your hair strand. That will be very difficult for you to see, but also because it is very light, it can travel very far. Further, when we talk about PM2.5, we are talking about particles that are about 20 to 30 times smaller than your hair strand. So that particle can even travel much further than the other particles. Now we also have the gaseous air pollutants. And just to give you an example, we're talking about sulfur dioxide, nitrogen dioxide, carbon monoxide, as well as ground level ozone and a number of other gaseous pollutants. Now, the main source categories of air pollution include 1, the anthropogenic sources, and this is just a fancy name for man-made or human activity. We also have the natural sources. And I'll give you an example. The man-made sources may include industrial emissions. We also have mining activities, which may emit a lot of dust particles in the air. And we also have something that is very familiar to a lot of us, the vehicular emissions. Also, we have open burning of waste. That is a major contribution to air pollution in Jamaica. In terms of the natural sources, we have, for instance, Sahara dust. And this has been featured a lot lately in the media. We'll notice that at a particular time of the year, we're having a lot of dust. And this dust is coming off the coast of the western coast of Africa, and it travels very far into the Caribbean and even further north. We also have forest fires, and as well as volcanic eruptions. And this photo on the slide is representing an eruption that occurred in St. Vincent, the Lassafrère volcanic eruption that occurred in 2021. Now, how does weather affect air quality? First, we'll talk about rainfall. Rainfall has a scrubbing or cleaning effect on air pollutants. Why? That is because air pollutants tend to stick to water droplets in air. And when it rains, the rain will remove that air pollutant from the atmosphere. And that is why you will notice after a good shower of rain, the air feels very crisp and clean. And we also notice that our visibility improves after a good shower of rain. And similarly, that is because the rain has scrubbed the air pollutants from the atmosphere. Now, wind speed. Wind affects the movement of air pollutants, sorry. So under calm conditions, we will tend to have higher concentrations because the air pollutants cannot be dispersed properly. When we have strong turbulent winds, however, that will result in lower concentration of air pollutants because the air pollutants are able to disperse very quickly in the atmosphere. Wind direction also affects air pollution. Now you'll notice this is an aerial shot of a fire at the Riverton disposal facility. And we'll notice that the plume of smoke is being pushed in the direction in which the wind is moving. So it is coming from, for example, if the wind is coming from the east, then the pollutants will move towards the west. Temperature also affects air pollution. We'll notice that when we have colder surface temperatures, the air pollutants tend to be trapped closer to the surface, and that can result in increased pollution concentration. Warmer surface temperatures, however, increase atmospheric mixing, and that causes better dispersion of the air pollutants. Sunlight also affects air pollution, and I know we can see this sometimes in different areas in Jamaica. We'll see a brown, hazy condition in some locations, and that is mainly because the pollutants under sunlight react to form what we call photochemical smog. We have examples. You'll see that in places like China, India, and in some areas of Jamaica, we can also notice smog. Now, how does air pollution affect us? First, it affects our health. Some of the health effects includes worsening certain health conditions. So you will notice that certain people that have asthma, they will get very bad asthma attacks during times when we have high concentration of air pollutants. Air pollution is also linked to some cancers. And the literature also knows that air pollution can disrupt our normal body functions. And it's also linked to certain infections such as skin infections and eye infections. There are also environmental effects such as acid rain. And this is because some of the acidic gas that is emitted from facilities that will interact with water vapor in the atmosphere forms a very dilute acid. And then when that falls, when the rain falls, then we have a whole host of negative impacts on water, soil, etc. We also can have eutrophication, fish kills, it affects plant growth, and also reduces our visibility. We also have the economic impacts of air pollution. And this is because air pollution increases the burden on the healthcare system. It also lowers our productivity because when there are high levels of air pollution, sometimes we can't go outside. It also causes poor crop yields in some areas. Now, why should we care about air pollution? The United Nations Environmental Programme notes that air pollution is the greatest environmental threat to public health, and it accounts for an estimated 7 million premature deaths every year. So, since we cannot control the natural sources of air pollution, we have to ensure that we appropriately manage all the man-made sources in order to safeguard public health and the environment. Now, how does NEPA manage air pollution? Currently, there is a regulatory framework. There are air quality regulations, as well as ambient air quality standards and STAX emission standards, which limit the amount of air pollutants that facilities can emit into the atmosphere. The current ambient air quality standards are presented on the slide. You will notice that there are limits for total suspended particulates, PM10, SOx, NOx, and the list goes on. And also for different averaging periods. Now, the consequences for breaching those regulations includes warning notices, control orders. We can even close down the facility, among many other actions. Now, an important part of managing air pollution also includes continued monitoring and assessment. And monitoring allows us to track air pollution levels and also helps us in the decision-making process. And you'll notice on the screen there, we are just highlighting a few of the monitors that we use to monitor air quality. Now, this map highlights the air quality monitoring network that we currently have in Jamaica. You will notice that the majority of the air quality stations are located on the south of the island. And that is basically because we have a lot of emission sources on the south rather than the north. But we are aiming to extend this monitoring network to many other parishes in the island. Now, that monitoring responsibility is currently shared between NEPA and licensed facilities. And you will notice that the government operates just about 13% of the monitoring network, with Bauxite operating about 67% of that monitoring network. Now, in terms of daily trends, I picked out two areas, the Mona air quality monitoring site, as well as the Spanish Town air quality monitoring site. And you will notice that on the graph, it shows that Mona has much less concentrations generally than the Spanish Town road site. And this is mainly because the Spanish Town road site is impacted by a lot more sources than the Mona site. You will also notice that there is a peak in the PM10 levels at the Spanish Town road site, and that occurred, I think it was June, and that was severely impacted by Sahara dust. You'll notice that green line there represents the limit or the standard for PM10, And during that Sahara dust incident, the concentrations of PM10 almost doubled. In terms of annual trends for those two sites, we saw that the Spanish Town site over the past 3 years has consistently exceeded our annual PM10 standard. Mona, on the other hand, was consistently below. So we can therefore conclude that Mona has better air quality than the Spanish Town road site. We also look at some trends for 3 urban areas, and this is in relation to PM 2.5. And what we picked up from those trends is that vehicular emissions is a major contribution to our air pollution. And why we say that is because the trends, the peaks that we are seeing in PM 2.5, those occurred during the periods when there was high traffic activity or peak traffic activity. We also noted that during the summer months, that is when Jamaica, the urban centers have increased PM 2.5 concentrations. Now, how do we prevent air pollution? Some of the more common ways we can eliminate open burning, we can practice composting and recycling, use cleaner sources of fuel, conserve electricity, ensure that our vehicles are well maintained, and also plant trees and maintain them, as these act as buffers around air pollutant sources. How can we protect ourselves? We have to limit certain activities during high concentration of air pollutants. We can also wear appropriate masks when we are in highly polluted areas. And that brings me to the end of the presentation. I just have 2 questions to ensure that you are listening. You can post the answers in the chat, and I'll ask from the list just to name the 2 main sources of air pollution. And 2, we can say, explain how weather affects air pollution. No, let me rephrase that. Explain how wind patterns impact air pollution. I thank you for listening.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Mrs. Jody and Marston. So we got a lot of information this morning on how wind and how air pollution affects us, right? And I know that you have questions. So I'm just going to ask that you write down your questions, because we have a question and answer section at the end. We'll just ask that you write down your questions so you don't forget them, because we're here to answer your questions and here to give you information that you can share, right? That you can use to write your SBAs. Now, let's just going back. Again, we have a question and answer section, so I'm just asking you to write down your questions. And remember that during that time, you use the raise hand feature, and then we acknowledge you and you open your mic and we ask that you ask the question there. And I noticed that nobody has answered the questions that Miss Charlotte had asked before. She asked one way that you can contact NEPA's documentation center. I'm not sure if it is that you did not hear the question properly, but remember that we have prizes to give away. And we have Mrs. Marston, who asked 2 questions a while ago, is to name 2 main sources of air pollution and to explain how wind affects air, right? The air quality, right? So we're looking out for those answers in the chat. So go ahead and put your answers in the chat while we go on to our next presentation. And we have a presentation on mangroves from Miss Shanalee Thomas. She is a scientific officer at the Discovery Bay Marine Laboratory Center for Marine Sciences at the University of the West Indies. Miss Ms. Thomas received her bachelor's degree in environmental biology and a master's degree in national resource management, specializing in marine and terrestrial ecology, both at the University of the West Indies. Her research area focused on mangrove rehabilitation at Refuge Key, Port Royal, as well as West Falmouth, Trelawney. Miss Miss Thomas has worked on a number of other projects with the Discovery Bay Marine Lab, including reef monitoring and rehabilitation, coral relocation, mangrove rehabilitation, and marine conservation education at primary and secondary levels. She also assists with instructing and facilitating students for undergraduate research and courses at the University of the West Indies, Mona. So make way now for Miss Thomas.
All right, thank you very much. I just want to confirm if everyone is seeing my screen.
Yes, Miss, we are.
Excellent. All right, so I'll jump straight into the presentation. Today we'll be looking at mangroves. And what do we know about mangroves? Mangroves they're special trees that grow along the coastline. So you can only find them in coastal areas or intertidal areas in tropical and subtropical regions. So while we might have trees that can tolerate growing along the beach or along the salty environment at the coast, mangroves are not only able to survive, they're also able to flourish or thrive, and they have ecosystems built around them. So they also allow other species to survive in that environment as well. And when I said intertidal zone earlier, I meant the area that is exposed during low tide and underwater during high tide. So when the water comes up high, mangroves are typically somewhat partially submerged. And then when the tide is low, then the mangroves are exposed. And I don't know how much you guys know about prefixes and suffixes, but I like to highlight that mangroves are halophytes, right? And halo means salt and phyte means plant. So they're salt loving or salt tolerant plants. All right, so where in the world do we find mangroves? Mangroves are found between 0 to 30 degrees north and south of the equator. So if you're looking at the map, you'll see the areas highlighted in green are areas that you typically find mangroves. Now, there are exceptions where you'd find some a little outside of the 30-degree mark, but generally, most mangroves are found within these areas. Now, locally, mangroves are found all across the island, around the island, but most of the larger mangrove stands are associated with riverine or river systems. So, depending on what parish you're from, you're probably familiar with some of these mangrove wetlands. So, if you're in St. Thomas, the Great Morass is an example of a mangrove wetland in your area. Or if you're from Kingston or St. Catherine, then you'd be familiar with the Palisadoes Port Royal Protected Area. Portland Bight is probably the largest mangrove stand that we have in Jamaica. If you're from St. Anne, the Pear Tree Bottom mangrove wetland is an example as well. Now, there are two classifications or two main groupings for mangroves. There are true mangrove species, and this really only means that there's a specific listing or specific characteristics which allow them to be identified as true mangroves. And then you have mangrove associates, which typically they might have some of the adaptations which would allow them to survive in the mangrove environment or the wetland environment, but not all of them. So true mangroves, they grow only in the mangrove environment or only in the wetland environment, and they have special adaptations which allow them to survive or thrive in this environment. So these characteristics are vivipary, and that's just a fancy word for the mangrove being able, or the seedling or propagule being able to survive or start growing on the tree before it falls to the forest floor or in the water. So most trees or plants that we're familiar with, the fruit undergoes a longer process before you can get another plant from that fruit, if you get what I'm saying. You can send us questions afterwards. So for mangroves, they will go through all of that process while still attached to the tree. So the picture on the right with the circle around the mangrove propagules, those are the propagules of the red mangrove, and those are actually still developing on the tree. So when the conditions are favorable, they will then drop to whether the forest floor or in the water and start establishing themselves. True mangroves also have prop roots. And I'll show you a picture of the prop roots of the red mangrove later on. True mangroves also have pneumatophores, and pneumatophores are structures which allow them to get air, considering that they're in a waterlogged, or it's mostly waterlogged or somewhat submerged environment most of the time. True mangroves also have special adaptations which allow them to get rid of the excess salt. So some mangroves can either exclude the salt from their system completely, or they can excrete it. So they might take up some of the salt and then get rid of it at some other point in time. So that brings us to the mangrove associates. So mangrove associates typically, as I said earlier, can survive in the mangrove environment, but they don't necessarily have all these adaptations or all these features to thrive as actual mangroves would. So worldwide, there are over 54 species of mangrove. And locally in Jamaica and in the rest of the Caribbean, we have only 3 mangrove species. So mangroves that you'd find in Jamaica, the true mangrove species, are the red mangrove, the black mangrove, the white mangrove, and then the mangrove associate is the buttonwood mangrove. And these are pictures of what the mangroves would look like. So that first picture here is a red mangrove. It's a small red mangrove, and that one is typically found right at the water's edge. And you'd also have black mangroves. This is not the best picture, but you can see two tiny black mangrove plants, as well as some pneumatophores around it. You also have the white mangrove, and then the buttonwood mangrove, which I said is the mangrove associate species. So the red mangrove is, I believe, the most identifiable mangrove tree. It has these prop roots, and if you think about the word, prop roots help to kind of props you up. So it keeps the upper structure of the plants out of the water. So it keeps the plant upright. Red mangroves also have drop roots. So these are also called aerial roots, and these hang down from the branches of the tree. And what they do, considering that the mangrove is in a waterlogged or a very wet environment, they allow for gaseous exchange or allow the tree to get air. Now, if you were wondering, and this is something that I should have said earlier, red mangroves are called red mangroves because they have a reddish color. So the bark and the trunk of the tree, the aerial roots and the prop roots are typically red, and that's as a result of the tannin that is found within the red mangrove tree. Now, in terms of the adaptation for the red mangroves are, and this one is still under research, the red mangrove is able to exclude salt from its system. So I believe between 90 to 97% of the salt that would be in its environment is blocked out from entering the tree. Now, some literature, some papers or books that you might read might tell you about a sacrificial leaf for the red mangrove. It's a common understanding, and that's something that we've accepted for a while. But other sources will tell you that the sacrificial leaf doesn't necessarily take up the salt. So before, we used to say that the sacrificial leaf would take up the excess salt from the tree and the toxins, and then the tree would drop that one yellow leaf and get rid of the salt. But other sources will tell you that red mangroves are capable of excluding the salt from their system, so not taking it up in the first place. And that brings us to the second mangrove species. This is the black mangroves. The black mangroves are also named because of the color of their bark or the roots. So they are typically darker than the red and the white mangroves. They also now have breathing roots, and breathing roots are the correct term for the breathing roots are pneumatophores. So if you look at the picture, you can see some pencil-like structures sticking up out of the soil. So those are the pneumatophores of the black mangrove, and these are attached to the root that runs underground. So there's a cable root that runs horizontally underground, and these tiny pneumatophores will just stick up out of the soil in order for the tree to get air. So I don't know if anyone has seen people snorkeling. It's the same concept. You have a snorkel in your mouth, and that snorkel, that tube allows you to get air from above while your head is somewhat at the surface or underwater. Now, how does the black mangrove deal with the salty environment that it's in? So black mangroves are salt excretors. So they're able to take up some of the salt from the environment, and that won't kill them. What they'll do is secrete the salt from the surface of their leaves. So on a very dry day or hot day, you will see salt crystals on the surface of the leaf. Now, for white mangroves, again, most of these mangrove species are named based on the color of the trunk or the color of the bark. So white mangroves have breathing roots as well, and these also stick up from the soil. The difference between the pneumatophores or the breathing roots of the white mangrove and the black mangrove is that these ones are more short and rounded, but they are also usually less noticeable than those of the black mangrove. Now, the white mangrove has these two structures at the base of the leaf, and they are called extrafloral nectaries. So that should give you a clue as to what they do. They produce nectar, and this assists with pollination of the mangrove plant. And then something interesting about it is that there's a symbiotic relationship or a special relationship between the white mangrove tree, well, most trees, but the white mangrove tree specifically. So the ants that would be attracted to this nectar, they also offer defense for the mangrove tree. So if goats or any other animal or insect tries to eat or feed on the tree, then these ants will act like basically an army. So how does the white mangrove tolerate its salty environment? So the white mangrove is also able to excrete the excess salt from its system. And it's not as if it's secreting these already hard salt crystals. So it comes out in liquid form, and then due to evaporation, these become crystallized on the surface of the leaf. Now, mangroves typically display a zonation pattern based on different factors. So in terms of elevation, the tide level, salinity, and wave action, different mangroves can tolerate these at different levels. So some mangroves will prefer more wave action, higher salinity, and tide level, and that determines where on the coastline you typically find them. So in terms of the order, if you are at sea looking inland, you are most likely to see the red mangrove, and then behind the red mangrove, you'd find black mangroves, then white mangrove, and then further inland, you'd find button mangroves. Now, this is a typical zonation pattern, but in some areas, you might find that the mangroves are all mixed up. So you might find white mangroves where the red should be, or you might find button mangroves where you typically find the black. So why are mangroves important? So mangroves have ecological importance as well as structural and socioeconomic importance. So in terms of ecological importance, mangroves serve as a nursery ground and a habitat for fish and other species. And this can be looked at different levels. So a typical mangrove tree, and if you're thinking about, for example, the red mangrove, you can find organisms living on the branches of the tree. You'd find like snails and crabs and that kind of thing. You'd also find lower on the plant, on the roots that are submerged, you'd find species such as ascidians or sponges, you'd find sea squirts, you'd find oysters, those kinds of organisms. And then moving up the tree, I said this earlier, you'd find crabs and snails. And then in the canopy of the tree, that's typically a home for birds. So you'd find species such as the pelican, the brown pelican, egrets, various types of birds. Mangroves also serve as a biological filter, or they help to purify the water. So they form a link between other coastal ecosystems such as seagrasses and um, coral reefs, and they help to remove the excess nutrients and excess pollutants, sadly, from the water before it gets to these more delicate ecosystems. In terms of storing carbon, I know all trees will take up carbon for photosynthesis and produce oxygen, but mangroves are 10 times more efficient than other trees, or the mangrove wetland is 10 times more efficient at storing carbon than any other forest that you'd find out there. So the carbon that they take up can be stored in the trunk of the tree, in the roots, in the bark of the tree, and they also store some of that carbon within the soil that they're in. So if, for example, we cut down mangrove forest or remove mangrove forest for whatever reason, then we are releasing lots of carbon into the atmosphere. And this, as you might know, will contribute to global warming and climate change. Mangroves also assist with maintaining the water quality. So you can link this to point number 2 in terms of ecological function. They help to essentially remove the excess nutrients, and they also help to trap sediment and build up land. So accretion is a fancy word for accumulating sand and building up sand or sediment. So before, in the event of like heavy rains or rainfall, where you'd have sediment loaded water heading towards your seagrass ecosystem or your coral reef ecosystem, mangroves are able to prevent that from happening. Mangroves are also important for coastal protection. So in terms of buffering the coastline from erosive force, waves and wind, the mangroves are excellent at doing that. So you can refer to that picture on the right, and I'm sure it's something that you can remember when doing your exams or writing up your SBA. So this guy has his nice house on the coastline, and he has cut down the mangrove trees. And in cutting down the mangrove trees, whenever the tide rises or whenever there's a hurricane or you have strong waves coming in, that water makes the house more vulnerable. So it literally takes out everything. In terms of the socioeconomic benefits of mangroves, mangroves are home, or about 120 million people live near mangroves, and they sometimes find direct or indirect benefits from it in terms of for their livelihood. So In some places, people might set up tours through mangroves. There are over 2,000 different types of mangrove attractions. People might go bird watching or go to crab bush. Our sister lab in Port Royal, they're situated right in the Port Royal protected area. They're also able to do teaching. So they'll take groups out for boat tours and show them the different types of mangroves and teach them about the benefits of mangroves. Mangroves are also important for recreation. So instead of cutting down mangroves and sometimes making coastal development, mangroves, you can construct something like a boardwalk. So it allows you to see what's in the mangrove forest without completely cutting it down or removing a great portion of it. Mangroves are also important as windbreaks. So in areas where you have cruise ships or transshipment areas, so back to Port Royal again, when there's a hurricane coming, sometimes ships seek refuge between the mangrove keys or the mangrove islands, and that keeps some of the wind off the ships and stop them from causing damage to the marine environment. So what are some of the threats to mangrove? So some of the natural threats include climate change and hurricane. Now, climate change can be associated with human behavior because it's some of what we do that would cause sea level rise and global warming and climate change. Hurricanes also affect mangroves. So even though they are excellent at um, being a buffer along the coastline or preventing erosion, they can also, with a strong enough hurricane, become damaged by these threats. In terms of human threats to mangrove, we have coastal development, and that is probably the largest threat that mangroves face currently. So construction of hotels or building highways, that kind of thing, through mangrove areas, if done unsustainably, can be very detrimental. Informal settlements is another thing, and that's just another term for like squatting along the coastline. Harvesting of charcoal and timber, harvesting for charcoal and timber, sorry, for production. So mangroves are sometimes cut down. So when we go into some mangrove forests, we might find something that people call a coal skill, they call it. And this is basically them just cutting down mangroves and piling the bark or the sections of the tree in order to make charcoal. Pollution is also a large factor that affects mangrove. And if you want to write, I guess, like a case study for your SBA, an example can be refuge key. And you can find information about refuge key by doing a Google search or searching for newspaper articles. So as a result of the plastic, mostly plastic and solid waste that comes on from the city of Kingston, these solid waste and other materials literally wash up on the coastline or on the shoreline of Refuge Key, and that resulted in the death of the middle of the forest. And Refuge Key is one of those important keys within the Port Royal protected area. So these are just pictures real quickly, what Refuge Key looks like, and you can see that the center of the forest is dying out. I don't know how clear it is on your screen, but if you look along this section here, which is the southern section, you would see that these white specks that you see here are actually piles of garbage along the coastline of Refuge Key, and it's the garbage that has resulted in the death of the middle of the forest. So these are pictures that were taken in about 2019, 2018 from Refuge Key, and you can see that the garbage has formed like a carpet basically on the forest floor. All right, so we're almost at the end of the presentation. In terms of rehabilitation, we have made strides in protecting and caring for or restoring mangroves in Jamaica. The establishment of protected area has lent itself to the conservation of mangrove forests and their services. So protected areas in the sense that we set up sanctuaries, and so where we limit the types of activities that might take place in these areas. They allow for better monitoring and care of the mangrove forest. Jamaica also has a sealing bank for restoration projects. So between our lab here in Discovery Bay and the Port Royal Marine Lab, we have a mangrove nursery where we collect seedlings from the wild, and it's almost like giving them a head start. So we collect the seedlings, plant them in bags, and we grow them until they are big enough to be transplanted out into a forest or an area which is degraded and in need of mangroves. There is still need for research and training in mangrove restoration and the ecosystem at large. In terms of another way in which mangroves are being protected or safeguarded is through EIAs. So the National Environment and Planning Agency, they will require developers to submit an EIA, and this EIA will outline how a development might affect a mangrove ecosystem. And typically, if a mangrove area is destroyed or removed, for example, then these mangrove or developers would need to pursue mitigatory or compensatory work. So if they have removed, for example, 10 acres of mangrove, then there must be a way in which they can compensate for that, whether in the same location or elsewhere. They need to reach out to us, for example, to get mangrove seedlings to replenish an equivalent to the area that they have destroyed. And that brings us to the end of the presentation. If you have any questions, I will still be here for the segment at the end of this. Thank you so much for listening.
A deep presentation, and I know that I'm looking forward to the questions at the end of today's presentations, right? So students, a gentle reminder, put down your questions because we have a question and answer section at the end. I must apologize because in my eagerness to start our seminar today, I forgot to introduce myself. I'm Alicia Barrett. I'm the community animator here at NEPA. So do forgive me for that, everyone. Now we have gone through our first set of presentations, and we are going to put up some questions for you to answer for us. We have some poll questions that we want you to answer for us today. 3 questions to be exact in terms of the presentations that we have done so far. So I'm just going to ask my technical team to put up those questions right now for you to answer. You have 30 seconds to answer each question. It's not anything too strenuous. It's just asking you about the presentations and whether or not you think they are good. We're giving you the information that you need in order to get your SBAs done and in order for teaching to be done as well, because I understand some teachers are online as well. So my technical team. All right, so I understand that the questions are up. So you have 30 seconds to answer each question. And after which we're going to take a very short break for persons who want to get up and stretch their legs and drink some water, get some tea, and come back while we take on the second half of today's set of presentations. So we're just going to give you like a 2-minute break, and then we come back with the rest of our presentations. Thank you so much for joining.
Keep we island clean, so clean. From the peaks to the beach, so clean. No dirty up Jamaica, please don't do it. Keep we island clean, so clean. From the peaks to the beach, so clean. No dirty up Jamaica, please don't do it.
No dash no paper, no dash no plastic. Dispose your garbage responsibly. No know how to recycle, learn it quick. And if you drop it, better pick up every piece of it. Plastics last forever, don't forget the bits. Cause when them touch the street, them end up in the sea. Collect pan the reef where they fish them feed. And when you want seafood, I eat your
Keep
eat.
the island clean, so clean. From the beach to the beach, so clean. No dirty up Jamaica, please don't do it. No dirty up Jamaica, no dirty up Jamaica, no dirty up Jamaica, no dirty up Jamaica. Keep the island clean, so clean. From the beach to the beach, so clean. No dirty up Jamaica, please don't do it. Keep the island clean, so clean. From the beach to the beach, so clean. No dirty up Jamaica, please don't do it.
No dash no paper, no dash no plastic. Dispose your garbage responsibly. No know how to recycle, learn it quick. And if you drop it, better pick up every piece of it. Plastics last forever, don't forget the bits. Cause when them touch the street, them end up in the sea. Collect pan the reef where they fish them feed. And when you want seafood, I eat your
Keep
eat.
the island clean, so clean. From the beach to the beach, so clean. No dirty. Keep the island clean, so clean. From the beach to the beach, so clean. No dirty up Jamaica, please don't do it. Keep the island clean, so clean. From the beach to the beach, so clean. No dirty up Jamaica, please don't do it.
No dash no paper, no dash no plastic. Dispose your garbage responsibly. No know how to recycle, learn it quick. And if you drop it, better pick up every piece of it. Plastics last forever, don't forget the bits. Cause when them touch the street, them end up in the sea. Collect pan the reef where they fish them feed. And when you want seafood, I eat your
Keep
eat.
the island clean, so clean. From the beach to the beach, so clean. No dirty up Jamaica, please don't do it. No dirty up Jamaica, no dirty up Jamaica, no dirty up Jamaica, no dirty up Jamaica. Keep the island clean, so clean. From the beach to the beach, so clean. No dirty up Jamaica, please don't do it. Keep the island clean, so clean. From the beach to the beach, so clean. No dirty up Jamaica, please don't do it.
No dash no paper, no dash no plastic. Dispose your garbage responsibly. No know how to recycle, learn it quick. And if you drop it, better pick up every piece of it. Plastics last forever, don't forget the bits. Cause when them touch the street, them end up in the sea. Collect pan the reef where they fish them feed. And when you want seafood, I eat your
Keep
eat.
the island clean, so clean. From the beach to the beach, so clean. No dirty. Keep the island clean, so clean. From the beach to the beach, so clean. No dirty up Jamaica, please don't do it. Keep the island clean, so clean. From the beach to the beach, so clean. No dirty up Jamaica, please don't do it.
No dash no paper, no dash no plastic. Dispose your garbage responsibly. No know how to recycle, learn it quick. And if you drop it, better pick up every piece of it. Plastics last forever, don't forget the bits. Cause when them touch the street, them end up in the sea. Collect pan the reef where they fish them feed. And when you want seafood, I eat your
Keep
eat.
the island clean, so clean. From the beach to the beach, so clean. No dirty up Jamaica, please don't do it. No dirty up Jamaica, no dirty up Jamaica, no dirty up Jamaica, no dirty up Jamaica. Keep the island clean, so clean. From the beach to the beach, so clean. No dirty up Jamaica, please don't do it. Keep the island clean, so clean. From the beach to the beach, so clean. No dirty up Jamaica, please don't do it.
No dash no paper, no dash no plastic. Dispose your garbage responsibly. No know how to recycle, learn it quick. And if you drop it, better pick up every piece of it. Plastics last forever, don't forget the bits. Cause when them touch the street, them end up in the sea. Collect pan the reef where they fish them feed. And when you want seafood, I eat your
Keep
eat.
it island clean, so clean. From the peaks to the beach, so clean. No dirty.
Welcome back, everyone. Welcome back. I take it that you have stretched your legs, you have drank your water, you have made your tea, gotten your fruits this morning, and you're ready for the second segment, right? Wonderful. So we're going to jump right into it, and we're starting off this second segment with a presentation on water quality, and this will be done by Mrs. Sophia Roden, who is a coordinator of the water quality unit here at NEPA. So for almost 10 years, Mrs. Roden has had the privilege of traversing the island and seeing the beauty that is Jamaica through her work here at NEPA. Officially, she works in the capacity of coordinator for the water quality unit, but she likes to consider herself as a professional water catcher. She has a master's in natural resource management from the University of the West Indies, Mona, and is a proud past student of the St. Hugh's High School for Girls. Before Mrs. Roden starts her presentation, we are going to have a short video showing you basic water quality sampling technique before her presentation starts.
Let's learn the basic water sampling techniques. There are many parameters that can be tested for water quality. Each parameter requires a unique way of collecting samples for testing. Let's take a look at how to collect water samples to be tested for the following parameters: fecal coliform bacteria, biochemical oxygen demand, nitrates, phosphates, suspended and dissolved solids. Water for bacteria testing is always collected first in a clean, sterilized bottle. Be careful not to touch the mouth or inside the cap of the bottle to prevent contamination as you dip once to collect your sample. No rinsing. Fill the bottle only to the shoulder so that the bacteria population can multiply for testing. For biochemical oxygen demand, we ensure that we condition our bottles by rinsing 3 times before collecting the sample. This removes any residue which may have been left behind during the wash process. Carefully and slowly, invert the bottle underwater to reduce bubbles forming during the collection. We want an airtight seal to know exactly how much dissolved oxygen is present in the sample. Try not to collect the sample in turbulent areas, and always remember to fill the bottle all the way to the brim. Our third collection is water for testing nitrates, phosphates, suspended and dissolved solids. Like our biochemical oxygen demand sample, the bottle is rinsed 3 times in the body of water before collection of the final sample. Remember to always discard the rinse water where it will flow away from the sample point. Here are some additional tips for successful sampling. After collecting your sample for biochemical oxygen demand testing, look to see if there are any bubbles in the bottle. To get rid of these bubbles, gently tap the sides and the mouth of the bottle, and this will cause the bubbles to float out to the top. And for a final tip, always remember, safety first, safety second, and safety third.
Good morning, students and teachers. Welcome to the water quality segment of your CSEC webinar. I am happy to be here with you today, and I hope you are just as happy to see me. I know it is close to lunchtime, so I will not be keeping you too long. And so let's get right into the presentation. Today we are looking at ambient water quality monitoring. All right, and so for background, this is what we do in the water quality unit at NEPA. We conduct monitoring at our beaches and rivers all over the island. We have over 300 sites, and we monitor these areas monthly and quarterly. The data that we collect is used to show trends and changes in the water quality over time and to inform the agency's decisions on certain matters. Basically, it is our responsibility at NEPA to manage and to protect our aquatic environment. Now, as we go through the presentation today, I want you to bear these questions in mind, right? Because I want you to think about these things as you go through the presentation, right? Because at the end of it, we want you to be able to answer them, right? So, do you know what is monitoring? Why do we monitor? What is pollution? Is water quality really important? How do we determine water quality? And what is a sample? All right, so bear those questions in mind as we go through and see if you can find the answers in the presentation. What is monitoring? I hope you have your thinking caps on, and I hope you have some answers turning in your head right now. Monitoring is the program process of sampling, measurement, and subsequent recording or signaling, or both, of various water characteristics, often with the aim of assessing conformity to specified objectives. And that is a mouthful, right? So here it is. And these are the key words that you want to think about when you hear the word monitoring. It's sampling, measurement, recording, often with the aim of assessing conformity to specified objectives. And here at NEPA, we monitor to define the water quality status and trends in Jamaica, to measure and observe the quality of the aquatic environment for a specific purpose. So for example, is it safe for recreational use? Are the pollutant levels very high in the water? And we also monitor to implement proper management and operational activities to stem the effects of pollution, right? So we are trying our best to put measures in place to reduce the impact of pollution on our waterways. But in order for us to monitor water quality, we need to know what it is. And here we have a few definitions, right? The condition or environmental health of a water body or resource, or you can call it the standard of purity that is necessary for the protection of populations in the aquatic environment and for recreational uses in and on the water. And the last one, which is my favorite definition because it is so short and spicy, it is the suitability of water for its intended purpose. So water quality speaks to the suitability of water to sustain various uses or processes, its intended purpose. Now, I know you might be trying to scramble and write down everything, but remember, you will get your presentations, and this is live streamed. You can always go back, all right? So don't worry too much. Let's just focus on what is before us right now. So now that we know what water quality is, what is pollution? If you look at these three pictures on the screen right now, the water does not look very appealing, right? We have discharge of this dark, brown, muddy-looking water into what might be a river. We have an oil spill, and here we have two young men having fun in a questionably looking body of water. I believe that we can look at these pictures and say, yes, these are polluted waters. What about this one? Is this polluted? Can you look at it and say it is polluted? You wouldn't. I'm sure if we passed this beach, we'd want to jump in right away. It looks pretty and clear and ooh, so nice and refreshing. But is it polluted? The answer to that question is we don't know. We cannot tell just by looking, because there are substances that can be added to the water body that you can't see with your naked eye. You might not be able to see it like how you can see the oil and the garbage, but there are things in there that are having a deleterious effect on the environment and are pollutants. And that is one of the reasons why we have to collect samples and run tests for these things that we are not able to see clearly with our eyes, right? And so in defining pollution, it is the introduction by man, humans, not just man, the gender male. It is the introduction by man, directly or indirectly, of substances or energy to the environment, resulting in deleterious effects. And these effects are hazardous to human health, they hinder marine activities, and they impair the quality of the water for its various uses. And it reduces the amenities of the waterway, right? So that is the definition of pollution by the United Nations. And so if I take a drop of olive oil, or a drop of cooking oil, and I put it in the river, that is not polluting the river. However, if I drive my boat and it starts to leak oil, gallons and gallons of oil in the river is not able to recover from such an input, right? And because it isn't able to recover from such an input, deleterious effects start to happen. So the oil starts to cover the surface of the water, and then there's no oxygen passing through the water column. The fish start to die, the plants start to die, things start to be deleted, so to speak, from the environment. And so that is when it becomes a pollutant. So the things that we test for, oftentimes they are naturally occurring in our waterways. However, when the levels reach or the concentrations are at a certain level, then it becomes a pollutant. It is deleterious to the environment. So some of our major water pollutants, we have microbes, right? And these are any microbial organisms, bacteria mainly, those that causes diseases. We have our nutrients, heavy metals, organic chemicals. And back to the heavy metals, some of the more common heavy metals are arsenic, cadmium, chromium, copper, nickel, lead, and mercury. And we have organic chemicals, right? We have oil and sediments, heat, and solid waste. So the chemicals, the organic chemicals, these include your petroleum, your industry solvents. These are human-made chemical compounds that have been made for a variety of products, such as pesticides, gasoline, and they are volatile. Sometimes they can be volatile in the environment, and they contain carbon and gases and organic chemicals that can harm and destroy the life in the organisms that live in our waterways. We have our suspended matter. These can come from your gullies and runoff. We have the microbiological pollutants. These come from mainly poor and untreated sewage discharges. We have our wastewater discharges that will introduce nutrients such as nitrates and phosphates. And we have decomposing matter from industrial activities as well as from organic chemicals that will cause a depletion in the oxygen levels in the water, right? So for an example of the microbiological one that we are very knowledgeable about is cholera. And this is a bacteria that occurs in areas that have poor access to water and poorly treated water, you'll have the cholera virus, the cholera bacteria in the waterway, and that can cause severe harm to human health. Now, the types of sources of pollution, we have what is called point sources. And just looking from the images here, it can give you an idea. These are pollution that come from a specific point. They are discrete. You can see that it is coming from the ship. You can see that it is coming from the pipes, right? And so the pollutants enter the waterway from a specific identifiable source. Now, for your non-point sources, this is when you can't really say exactly where the pollutants are coming from, and it's mainly caused by runoff. So you may have a field here that they use fertilizer and pesticides over there, and the rain falls and everything just starts to wash away and wash down into the river. And so for your non-point source of pollution, land runoff, precipitation, atmospheric deposition, seepage, hydraulic modification, right? They are not discrete and they can come from many different sources. And so these are the two main sources of pollution. At NEPA, we monitor certain parameters, and these are called indicator parameters, and they can give us an idea of what is in the water and the concentration of these pollutants. Now, there's a wide range of water quality parameters that we can choose from. However, the best information comes from parameters that can tell you about the bacteria levels, nutrient levels, oxygen levels, clarity, how well you can see the water, and the pH. And so we can pull from those general groupings these specific parameters that we will go into right now. So you have nitrate and phosphate. These come under nutrients. Because they are from increased levels. Their increased levels indicate the presence of sewage, fertilizers, and wastewater, and they can cause eutrophication, which is when your water body becomes overrich with nutrients, and that can cause the overgrowth of algae and lead to oxygen depletion as well. Right? And the test that is done for nitrate is the cadmium reduction test, and this is the apparatus that we use. As said before, at NEPA, you can access our pre-planning. By planning before, you can come and access our laboratory, and we'll show you the different water testing that we do for these parameters. You also have biochemical oxygen demand. So basically, that is a measure of how much oxygen is required for microbial decomposition. And when you have high BOD, biochemical oxygen demand, you have low dissolved oxygen, and this induces stress on the aquatic organisms. So basically, they'll start to choke, suffocate, and die. And that is what can cause a lot of fish kills in the river system or in the sea. And this is the apparatus that we use for the BOD Day 5 method of testing. Now, the next parameter is fecal coliform bacteria. As the name suggests, this bacteria comes from feces. It's an indicator of sewage contamination, and it also indicates the presence of other pathogens which can cause gastrointestinal issues. Right, so this is also a concern, especially as it relates to human health. And we use the multiple tube fermentation method of testing for fecal coliform. So we can't count each and every bacteria, right, individual bacteria cell. But what we can do is we can look to see when the bacteria are alive and they're respiring, they will give off gases. And in these tubes, you will notice that some of these tubes have some little bubbles in them. And these bubbles indicate that the presence of the fecal coliform bacteria. And so that is what we use to analyze for this parameter. Now, pH, I know we look at our water bottles and it's a naturally alkaline, pH 7. And this is talking about how acidic or basic a substance is. Organisms operate at an optimal pH range, and life functions are limited outside of this range, right? So, like us, many Jamaicans, we operate at an optimal temperature range. For some of us, when we go to Canada, we just shrivel up and we get too cold. We don't even want to bathe. It's like we can't function properly. And when we go a little further down south, it's like it's just too hot. We can't even manage. We can't think clearly, heat stroke and everything. So there is similarly an optimal pH range for organisms in the aquatic environment. Outside of this range, it is very hard for them to survive. And our waters, especially our rivers that have a natural buffering capacity from the limestone bedrock, limestone sediment, it is hard to change the pH so easily. And so when you see a change in pH, especially in our rivers, and it goes higher, it goes very low, you can surmise that, okay, something has been added to the water that is causing this, and that is a pollutant. So sample collection, as we said, we go out every month, every quarter, and we collect samples. So the video that was played before, I hope that you were listening, it went through how it is that we conduct sampling, how we collect our samples, right? And sampling is the process of, oh dear, I pressed the wrong button. I'm going to ask the team if they could resume it for me. You see, when you're not so used to the new technology, you know. All right, yes, and we are back again. Thank you very much. All right, so it's always so good when you have persons here who can help you out with your mistakes. All right, so the sampling now is the process or the technique of selecting an appropriate portion or piece of a complete system or group, right? And why is it that we have to collect a sample? It's because we just can't test everything, right? So we have to look at the environment that we're sampling from, right? And select what represents it, what is the best representative of that environment. It is an easy and reliable method. It's been tried, tested, and true. And once it's carried out correctly, it can represent the whole system. All right? So that is why we sample. And so these are some of the sample bottles that we use. You would have seen them in the video earlier. All right? As we said, we go all over the island monitoring our rivers and beaches. Now, why at the end of the day, we're not just collecting the samples to keep them and look at them. No, we are collecting them so that we can get data and interpret this data, right? And so here now, I want to go through with you just some examples of how we use the data that we collect to interpret, to have some interpretation of what's happening in the environment, and also to tickle your brains a little of, you know, if you want to do water quality for your SBA, these are some of the things you can maybe look at, right? So, as I said, we have our parameters that we test for: nitrates, phosphate, BOD, fecal coliform. We also have a national standard that we compare the values that we test for with. And we want to ensure that the water quality is within the standard, right? Or it measures good to the standard. So here I have a graph here, and this is showing the mean average BOD, right? So mean is another word for average, BOD concentrations. And this is for the White River. Now, here we have 3 sample points: White River upstream, White River middle, and White River downstream. Now, as you go downstream, the water quality will change. Can you think of why that is? Think about it. Discuss it among yourself. Why is it that the BOD reading upstream is less than the BOD reading downstream? If you look at the graph, the BOD concentration increases as you go downstream. Now remember, BOD is the amount of oxygen available for microbial activity. Also remember that when you have high BOD, you have low dissolved oxygen. So if BOD is increasing as you go downstream, then it can be safe to say that dissolved oxygen should be decreasing as you go downstream as well. What is that? Why? What is the cause? Is it possible that maybe when they're upstream site, you don't have a lot of human input? Because remember, humans are the ones that cause pollution. Maybe you don't have a lot of humans settling upstream, but then as you go downstream and closer to the coastline, you start to get more dense populations. People start to put in sewage and all sorts of things into the river. What could it be? Think on these things. Average fecal coliform concentration. Now here you have two lines on this graph. You have one for 2015 and you have one for 2019. And this is for the Rio Cobre, right? So these sites are in Rio Cobre. So here you see that for the 2015 year, fecal coliform concentration started to decrease as you go downstream. But then it was just kind of up, down, but generally increasing as you go upstream for 2019, right? What does this say to us, right? So this is one of the things we can look and we can compare our data year by year, comparing a previous year with a current year to see, okay, how has the water quality changed? There was improvement in 2015, but then in 2019, it's like everything just started to go haywire, right? And these can be based on different factors. So when you go out sampling and you collect your data, you also collect other data that can tell us what is happening. What could be in making an input? Is it that we have more shops, more sewage input in 2019? What is it that caused the increase in fecal coliform downstream in 2019? Right? So let's look also at, you can look at water quality trends. So I'm taking here Kingston Harbor. This is an area that has been monitored for the past 20 years. We have 12 sample points established, and various programs have been implemented over the years to address pollution issues. Now, it is well studied in academia, and one of the biggest studies that we have that has been done on Kingston Harbor is pollution levels, right? So here now we have some graphs. Again, this can show you the trend, how it is that the samples perform over time, basically. So the graph on the left, it shows you the percentage of samples that were within the ambient standards for biochemical oxygen demand for each year from 2015 to 2020, right? And you start to see that, okay, in 2015, you had 84% of the samples having good BOD readings. But then in 2019, is only 32%, and in 2020 is only 66%, right? So you see that there's a decrease in the number of samples that are meeting the standard. And the graph on your left shows the distribution of the readings that you get, the data that you get, how it compares to the standard line, which is in red. How many samples are above the standard and how many samples are below the standard. So this one is for fecal coliform as well, showing that, okay, in 2015, 84% of the samples had good fecal coliform concentrations. And it declined, and it declined. And in 2020 is just 60%, right? It went up a little from 2019, but it's still less than 2015. And you can see, though, also with the graph on the right, that while a lot of the samples are, close to the upper limit, you can see that some of them well surpass. Because the limit for marine, the standard for marine is 13, and you have sites that are measuring over 1,600 in concentration, right? So this is what we do with our data. We're able to see, okay, over the years, things have not been improving, or over the years, things are improving. We can say, okay, it has gotten worse downstream, or it has gotten better downstream. We're also able to use our data to create maps to say, okay, which area has higher concentrations of a particular parameter, and we can see how the concentration spread within a geographical area, right? So just to give you a little nugget on the global outlook for water quality, there's a thing called dead zones, and this is where marine life just cannot survive, and over 240,000 square kilometers exists globally, right? So these areas, they can no longer sustain life because they have low or zero oxygen, and about 500 dead zones exist across the globe. All of those red spots that you see are dead zones, right? And this is what happens when the area becomes so polluted, we just cannot have any life existing. Bringing it back to the Caribbean, 25% of the region has access to sewage treatment systems. 52% relies on latrines. So I am not a maths person, but 52 plus 25 is certainly not 100%. So can you imagine what the remainder who don't have pit latrine and don't have sewage system are doing with their waste? Ask your teachers about the helicopter method, and let's see if they can tell you about the helicopter method. But thankfully, with the plastic ban, we shouldn't be having too much helicopter methods, all right? Industrial discharges, sewage, runoff, sedimentation, and improper waste disposal are the main culprits in water pollution in the Caribbean. So we have come to the end of the presentation, and I just like to leave with you 2 questions. I hope you were listening, and I hope you remembered the questions that we asked at the start. So the 2 questions I'd like you to consider is, what is monitoring? And the second question is, what is pollution? Have a good day. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Roden, for such a wonderful presentation. And a lot of these young people are not going to know what the helicopter method is. But I figure because of Google, they're just going to jump on their phones quickly, and maybe that is if Google knows what it is as well, because, you know, a lot of people not sure what the helicopter method is. So I just want to thank you very much for that, and we're looking out for your answers in the chat. Her questions are, just a reminder, what is monitoring and what is pollution? And I must say congratulations to Nashika Dennis from the Irwin High School. She is our winner for the first question that was asked. And we have sent her information on what to do in order to get her prize. I'm not going to tell you what her prize is, because so far she's the only person that has answered a question in the chat. So I'm just waiting on everybody else to, you know, jump in and tag along, because we have prizes and surprises to give away, and I will tell you all about it at the end. So reminder of the questions again: what is monitoring and what is pollution? And a gentle reminder to write down your questions, because at the end of this section, the segment rather, we're going to have a question and answer section where you can open your mics and ask your question for our presenters to answer. So moving right along, we have a presentation on coral reefs, and this will be done by Miss Trudy Campbell. So Miss Campbell is from Donald's Land Retreat in St. Mary. She completed her secondary education at Marymount High School in St. Mary, and she continued to Portmore Community College in St. Catherine, after which she matriculated to the University of the West Indies, Mona, where she did a bachelor's degree in environmental biology. She currently works at the Discovery Bay Marine Laboratory in the capacity of outreach and project officer for the North Coast Mangrove Conservation Project in Trelawney. So make way and get yourselves ready to take down some notes on coral reef as Miss Campbell do her presentation.
Good morning, students and teachers. Thank you all for having me. I will get straight into the presentation. Okay, so today I will be presenting on the coral reef ecosystem. First, I'll start off by, well, I can't ask you guys, but what are coral reefs or what are corals? Corals are basically sessile animals. They can't move and they plant themselves to the seafloor. So just like you have octopus and other animals that can walk around or swim, corals do not move. They're permanently attached to the base of the seafloor. Okay. So we typically find corals in shallow tropical waters right around the world. It consists of small organisms with a calcium carbonate skeleton. We have two types of corals, and these are ahermatypic, which are soft corals, and hermatypic, which are hard corals, and these are the reef building corals. Okay, so coral reef occupies 1% of our ocean over the world. However, they are responsible for 25% of marine habitats. All right, so in order for a coral to survive, there are certain physiochemical factors that should be in range at all time. And these are temperature, salinity, and also pH, which is not on the screen. So temperature ranging from 18 to 30 degrees Celsius is the typical range. Salinity is ranging between 26 to 35 parts per thousand, and a pH range of 8.1. So it is slightly basic. All right, so where do we find corals? As I mentioned before, we normally find them in the tropics where it is warm. So 30 degrees north and 30 degrees south of the equator. The Indian Ocean and the Red Sea, 60% of the coral reefs we can find in that region. In the Pacific, we have 25%. And in the Caribbean, we only have 15%. All right, so difference between stony coral, stony or hard coral is the same thing, and a soft coral. So stony coral are the architects of coral reef, which they're the one that can create skeletons out of calcium carbonate. Soft corals are non-reef building. Hard corals generally has this relationship with an algae that we call zooxanthellae. And that is where it gets 95% of its food. However, soft corals can survive without zooxanthellae. Okay, so the diagram on the right is showing the coral polyp. And around the mouth of it, I'm not sure if you're seeing the cursor, but around the mouth are some tentacles. And these tentacles consist of stinging cells. So the coral use these tentacles to catch 5% of the food. So within these polyps, you have the algae living in it, and the algae is called zooxanthellae. And this zooxanthellae, through the process of photosynthesis, provides 90% of the food that the coral eats. Okay. All right, so this is an up close picture of the polyp. So the yellowish substance that you're seeing inside on the right, which is it is magnified on the left. These are the zooxanthellae that lives in the coral polyp and provide food for the coral. So it is a symbiotic relationship. So the algae gets somewhere to live and the coral gets food in order to grow. All right, so this is a diagram showing parts of the coral polyp. So you have the tentacles that you find around the mouth of the coral, followed by, if we're going down, next in line is the throat or the pharynx, and then you have the stomach of it. So the nematocyst or stinging cells is what the coral use to capture food, and this is typically zooplanktons that you find swimming around. They are tiny and microscopic, and we are not able to see them with our eyes. Okay, so different types of coral. First, we have just some examples, so you guys are familiar with it. We have Acropora palmata, known as elkhorn coral, and this is hard coral, so it's made of calcium carbonate. Secondly, the one in the middle, it's called Gorgonia ventalina, and it's the common sea fan that we know. It is a soft coral. As you can see, it's kind of mesh-like, and it is bendable and flexible. Thirdly, we have Acropora cervicornis, also known as staghorn coral, and it is a hard coral. Okay. Next, we have Agaricea agaricites. This is lettuce coral. In the middle, we have the grooved brain coral, scientific name Diploria labyrinthiformis. Thirdly, we have Montastria cavernosa, known as the great star coral. So I want you guys to take notes of the different shapes and the different formation of these corals, because corals are very diverse. They're very resilient. They can, based on the water current, they can adjust their shape. Okay. And we have finger coral called Parietes. And finally, we have the sea whip, which is kind of similar to the Gorgonian, which is a sea fan. It is a soft coral. So we looked at two soft coral, and the rest are hard. So we have the sea whip and the sea fan, which are soft corals. Okay, so coral ecological importance. Why is coral reef important? All right, so coral reef, it is nicknamed the rainforest of the ocean, and that is because of the wide array of biodiversity of plants and of animal species that you find in this ecosystem. So it provides a nursery ground for a lot of organisms. It is home for mostly adult fish. As you know, the juveniles you would find those in the mangrove area. We have a lot of invertebrates living in this section, such as sea urchin, like diadema. You have sea cucumbers. You can find jellyfish. You can also find sea star, sea anemone, parrotfish, doctorfish, a wide array of different species. Okay. Another importance of our coral reef is that it assists in degrading wave energy. Okay, so for instance, if we should have a tsunami or a storm or hurricane, the first line of defense at sea would be the coral reef. So it acts as a barrier and it buffers the wave action. Okay, so other importance, coral reef is very important as it relates to ecotourism. it generates more than 25% more than fishing. In Jamaica, I think tourism is Jamaica's biggest money earner. And it's very important. We have a lot of tourists coming to our country just to snorkel and just to look at our reef. Another importance is it can be used to create pharmaceutical compounds. So many persons don't know that a lot of the compounds that you find in the reef, you don't find them anywhere else in the world. And so they basically use these to create medicines for heart disease, HIV, leukemia, and so on. Okay, so major threats. We're looking at some threats now that coral reefs are facing in the Caribbean and the world at large. Okay, so in Jamaica in particular, in the 1970s, we have observed where the coral reef basically starts to decline by the 1980s straight to 1993. Okay, and we have different reasons or different factors influencing the decline of coral, some of which we have overfishing, pollution, coral disease, and bleaching. So overfishing, which is a serious issue that we have in Jamaica currently, fisher folks, even when the season is closed for like lobster or conch, or even though you have a ban on certain important reef species such as the parrotfish, we have fisher folks still, catching these animals and not obeying the law. Okay, so pollution is also another factor that is causing the decline. And this is because, eventually pollution results in death of corals due to blockage of sunlight as a result of algae overgrowth on the reef. And so with overfishing, if we should these fisher folks catching off the keystone species of the reef, such as the parrotfish. We don't have any parrotfish to keep the reef in check. So that's one of the main role of the parrotfish and also the doctorfish. It's to keep the algae level, the macroalgae level in check. And also the diadema, that's the black sea urchin. So it plays a role. They are all herbivores. They feed on the macroalgae and keep the levels in check. So in around the 1980s, there was this white band disease that causes a decline in the coral. Scientists, they do not know to this day what was the cause of that disease. However, it resulted in massive decline in coral cover right across. In the 1970s also, we had Hurricane Allen coupled with Hurricane Gilbert, So with all of these natural disasters, yes, coral reef, they are resilient and they would be able to recover over time. However, coupled with overfishing and pollution and diadema deaths, that resulted in this massive decline that we're seeing here. So in the 1970s, the coral cover was around 70%, and by 1993, it declined drastically to only 5%. Yes. Okay, so before I get to this slide, I want to point out that the three major coastal ecosystems that we have, mangrove, seagrass, coral reef, they're all interconnected. So for instance, if you should cut down the mangroves, you would prevent the mangrove from carrying out its function, which is basically improving the water quality, filtering sediments and so forth. So without the mangrove present, you find that all of those nutrients, all of the waste would just go straight to the reef. Okay, so first in line, coming from land, we have the mangrove ecosystem, and that does some amount of absorption of nutrients and toxins from the water. The seagrass beds, which is next in line going out to sea, does some amount of absorption of nutrients, and so you have less nutrients reaching the coral reef. And that is what the corals need in order to survive. However, based on our actions overall as humans, we realize that this can lead to climate change eventually, global warming, which can cause ocean acidification, coral death. Yeah. Okay. So what can we do, or what do we do in order to combat this effect, to make up or to increase the coral cover? We have the artificial iron reef module. I think this module was created by our principal scientific officer. Basically, you would attach the coral to this iron module, and then you place it in the seafloor and allow the corals to grow naturally. Okay, so in the picture, in the second one, where my cursor is, you can see somebody cutting a piece of an Acropora palmata, and that's basically to grow them. So this picture, all right, so this first picture is showing one of our scientists, former scientists, basically cutting the coral. So it's cutting the corals in small pieces, and then after which you basically have them in a nursery and you observe them to see if they're growing over time. After which, after you have observed growth and so forth, you take them out to plant them on areas, reefs that have been destroyed and so forth. And then you carry out monitoring to see what's happening or if it's growing and so forth. Okay, so at this time, yeah, these are some pictures showing the growth. I have a video that I want to show you guys that basically sums up the events that have occurred and resulted in the decline of our coral reef. If you have any questions about coral reefs, you can save them at the end. I'll be more than happy to answer. And thank you. And the video should be playing next.
Coral reefs can be so awe-inspiring that they change a person's life in a minute.
Well, the first time I saw a beautiful reef, I was so transported. I decided I had to become a marine biologist.
Reef ecologist Judy Lang did her graduate research in Jamaica, a jewel of the Caribbean Sea. It was the early 70s. And the beautiful coral reefs attracted tourists from all over the world. But 40 years later, algae now smothers the reefs.
Jamaica is the first place that reefs really declined in a precipitous manner really quickly.
But it didn't happen by chance or all at once. It began with overfishing. In 30 years, the bigger predators like grouper, barracuda, and sharks were all but wiped out. But no one suspected this would endanger reefs. Then the mysterious white band disease suddenly appeared and began to kill off the signature elkhorn and staghorn corals. Next, Hurricane Allen's 40-foot waves pounded Jamaica's coral into dust.
It was analogous to a forest fire coming through and burning down all the trees.
Weak, infested with snails and worms, the beautiful elkhorn and staghorn corals almost disappeared. And the calamities piled up when the population of sea urchins was decimated 2 years later.
And even today, we still have not figured out what the cause of the die-off was.
The little black urchins had served a useful function.
They would eat all the algae in their path, and they kept the reef clean.
Parrotfish and doctorfish also grazed the algae along the reefs. But now, with the bigger fish gone, local fishermen filled the markets with these smaller cows of the sea, and their numbers plummeted. Without the herbivores, corals were overrun with algae and seaweed. And the onslaught continued. Farming became more industrialized, and hotels lined the beaches, pouring fertilizers, sewage, and other nutrients into the sea. Food for plants and algae. And the final blow is global warming.
The greenhouse effect is warming the oceans, and it turns out that corals already live very close to their upper thermal limits.
In this damaged environment, mass bleaching drained corals of their color and life. For Jamaica, these assaults add up to disaster.
We used to have 60 to 70% of the bottom covered by coral. Today there's 2 to 5% in many, many places.
The same story repeats itself throughout the Caribbean, where coral reefs have declined by 80%. What took a few decades to destroy will take centuries to repair. But it can be done.
We understand now that reefs are very, very resilient. These corals can rebound. And I think just over time they can come back as long as we take steps to reduce human threats.
Governments across the Caribbean are now stepping up to meet the challenge through better management. In new marine protected areas, fish stocks can replenish themselves. And nurseries of baby corals grow to regenerate damaged reefs. New building regulations prevent sediment and pollution from flowing into the ocean. In Belize, the government has banned catching parrotfish and other plant eaters that clean the reefs. If these initiatives are expanded, coral reefs will have a chance to recover.
All right, such a wonderful presentation. Thank you so much, Miss Trudy and Campbell, for that presentation. And I know that the students and the teachers have as well have learned a lot about coral reefs. I saw some very interesting photos there in that presentation. So that was a very beautiful presentation. Thank you very much. We are going to move right into our geography SBA tips. And this will be done by Miss Kenisha Brown Russell. She is the head of the geography department at the Camperdown High School. So Mrs. Brown Russell has fulfilled many duties in the academic discipline of geography. She is currently the head of the department, the geography department, and dean of academic studies at Camperdown High, where she has been teaching for 17 years. She is also president of the Geography Teachers Association and supervisor of the Cape SBAs for CSEC. Over the years, Mrs. Russell has worked assiduously to improve the achievements of students in geography at both the CSEC and the Cape level. Now, this is a time, students, that you want to get your pens and your pencils out and take some notes, because this is the important, all the other presentations were important, but that is the information. She will be telling you now how to really and truly get that A+, that 100 on the SBA, right? Because everybody wants to get that one. All right, thank you so much. Over to you, Mrs. Russell.
All right, thank you so much. And you're so correct about that. Grade 1. A pleasant morning to our teachers, our students, and to the NEPA team. And I just want to take this opportunity to thank the NEPA team for including this very important component of the geography syllabus. And that is the written account, the SBA. So, after going on that fun trip, what do you do with all that data that you collected? Now, over the years, we have actually had students who produce a SBA that is, I'm very sure, less than their capabilities. And this morning, I just want to take the opportunity to go through the main components of the SBA and to just zoom in on those details that would make the difference between 20 out of 40 marks or 40 out of 40, which is what we really want our students to attain. So I'm going to encourage the students to get out their pencils right now, get out your notebooks, because I'm quite sure that you'll not be able to remember all the details that Mrs. Russell present throughout the SBA presentation. All right, so we're gonna get right into it. Now, I know that we are in February, and some persons may be anxious as it relates to starting the SBA if you haven't started or completing it. But I'm here to encourage you. Yes, it's February, and if it is that you're just starting the SBA, you would have been late. But if it is that you decide that, listen, you're going to start today at the end of the presentation, I can attest to the fact that you will finish, and with the guideline that I'm going to be outlining, you will actually get a good grade. All right, but we can't delay any longer because the geography SBA do encompass a whole lot of details that you have to make sure that you pay attention to. Now, whether or not you are at 0%, 20%, or more than 20%, or at least 50% of the SBA, I am going to go through the different components of the SBA, starting from the very front, which is the table of content, right up to the conclusion. All right, so I just want everybody to pay special attention to the details. All right, now if we are not certain about the percentage that is given over to the SBA, it's actually 20%, and that's 40 marks that we're playing with. And for my students, I always say to them that, listen, this is a component that you can get 40 out of 44, because the truth is CXC gives us just about 2 years. Real and truly, the syllabus starts in grade 10, grade 9 for some persons. So we get just about 2 years to actually undertake that field study and put the research together and put the SBA together in order to get that 40 marks. So we have quite a bit of time. If it is that we're just starting in the grade 11 year, then yes, we may feel pressured into putting everything together. But nonetheless, I'm quite certain that we can make it between now and March when the SBAs are actually due. All right, so that's 40 marks that we're playing with. And it matters not how difficult the teacher actually marks. I am going to go through with you the different details that are required for each component. All right, now, just to go through the main components of the SBA, so we're talking about the aim, and that's 2 marks there. The introduction, which is another 2 marks. The location of study, which is 4 marks. The methodology, which is another 4 marks. The presentation of data, that's 4 marks there. The analysis of data, that's 10 marks. The conclusion, 4 marks, and the bibliography, 1 mark. And last but not least, we have the table of content, which is 1 mark. Now, this doesn't add up to 40 marks because there are other components that CXC has included in order to give you your 40 marks there. And we're talking about, for example, grammar and the quality of data that you actually present in the SBA. But just to highlight the sections that tend to give students a bit of a problem, and for that reason, we tend not to get the maximum marks that we want. Now, the first area that I actually highlight there is a table of content, and believe it or not, this is a section where we actually tend to lose out that 1 mark. And I want us to pay very special attention to it. So we tend to leave it at the very end when we have finished putting everything together. But unfortunately, we tend not to put everything in, like the page numbers. So we tend not to get that 1 mark. The location of study area, this is another ticklish area as well, because this is where we have to roll out our artistic skills, and we have to be very precise in what we actually draw. So more often than not, we tend not to get that full marks for the location. The presentation of data is another area that we tend not to do so well on, so I'm going to spend the time to look at that area. The analysis of data, this is hefty marks here. This is 10 marks, and again, we tend not to include enough in order to get that 10 marks. The conclusion, which is at the end of the SBA as well. We tend to be very limited in what we present in this section, and as a result of that, we tend just to get probably like two marks out of the 4, or even 1 mark out of the 4. So I'm going to get right into the SBA just from the very start, so that we can capitalize on that 40 marks there. Now, if we're just starting the SBA, or if we're going to start soon after this presentation, the first thing we ought to do when we are getting ready to put that SBA together is to ensure that that topic is on the syllabus. So you're going to go online, go on the CXC website, look at the topics that are presented in the syllabus, and you are going to ensure that, listen, the topic that you select is actually on the syllabus there. Now, the next thing that you're going to ask yourself is the area that you have selected enough, that will actually give you enough information as it relates to data collection. So a lot of time, yes, the topic is actually in the syllabus, but then the area that you have actually selected doesn't lend itself to much data collection. And if that is not the case, then we can't go on to study that particular location. Then we want to look at the objectives of the syllabus. Is it that what we're going to do for the SBA, does it match the objectives set out in the syllabus? So we just want to ensure that everything that we do, we're actually matching it back to the syllabus to ensure that we're covering all our bases. So you're going to go ahead and you're going to research your topic. So if your topic is on rivers, you want to ensure that you do some background reading as it relates to rivers, because when you go out there in the field, you want to ensure that everything that you would have read in the textbook, you are able to identify it out into the field. So very, very important. We just don't want to go on a field trip with an empty head. We have to ensure that we have some sort of background information there. Then we are going to formulate our research question. What is it that we're going out in the field to study? What are we going to be doing? So we have to clearly define that before we get out there. And I know our teachers will definitely help us with this component, but you can do it as well as it relates to the topic that you're doing. Next, from that research question, you want to formulate your aim. And your aim is what you're actually going out into the field to undertake. So once again, we want to ensure that 1, the topic is on the syllabus. 2, are you able to collect adequate data in a defined geographical area? Very, very important. Am I able to write research questions that match the objectives in the syllabus? So we want to ensure that we are actually covering those 3 questions. Now I have examples there to the left hand of the page. Now the topic there, for example, would be industries. Is that topic on the syllabus? We do a check, and yes, we tick that off. Then is this area enough to actually collect some sort of geographical data? And if that's a yes, we tick that off as well. And are we able to undertake data at that particular location? And we are going to ensure that the research objectives match that is outlined in the syllabus. Now, as it relates to your aim, just a few more tips there. The aim ought to be specific. We don't want something that is general now, as it describes the question to be asked and answered during your field research. Now, we're doing an SBA with words of 1,000, so we don't have much room to play with. It's 1,000 words. That's the limit. So we have to ensure that our aim is as specific as possible in order to meet that word limit. It should include descriptive terms such as identify, to describe, to discuss, to observe, to compare, to contrast. Avoid using terms such as investigate. These terms are very vague, and it may lend itself to quite a number of things. So we want to be as specific as possible. So I would encourage you to stick to words such as identify, describing, comparing, contrasting as it relates to your aim. And the last, but certainly not least, the aim must include the study area. So if we're looking at a particular river, we must say exactly where along the river we are actually studying. And in that location, we actually also include the territory as well. So if we're undertaking a river study, for example, in St. Mary, and we're looking at, for example, the Wogwater River, we must say where exactly along the Wogwater River that we're studying, as well as we must say that we're talking about Jamaica, because if you know anything about the Caribbean, we tend to have a number of the same places in the different Caribbean countries. So we have to be as specific as possible. All right, so I've put together an aim here, which is well, okay, excuse me, as it relates to the requirements of the syllabus. And it is to identify and discuss the main factors influencing the location of the Grace Food canning in Kingston, Jamaica. Now, if we look on our syllabus, we would have realized that food processing industries is one of the objectives that is actually conduct study at any one of the food processing industries that we have in Jamaica, and we have quite a few. All right, so we're actually able to undertake locational studies as it relates to any one of them. Another suitable aim that we have here is to analyze the effectiveness of community members' response to flooding in Taylor's Land, St. Thomas, Jamaica. So once again, we're ensuring that the aim is as specific as possible. And then last but not least, we have to identify and describe the coastal features formed along the White Horses coastline in St. Thomas, Jamaica. So once again, we want to ensure that our aim is very specific and it actually includes the area of research. All right, just some other topics that you can actually undertake if it is that you have not yet started the SBA and that relates to hazard. You may want to look at the impacts of a selected hazard in a particular location, or you may want to look at the response of individuals or national and regional agencies to reduce the effects of hazards in a particular location. So if, for example, if we're looking at flooding, you may want to do a little study as it relates to the response, how persons respond to flooding in a particular area. All right, still some suggestions as it relates to topics. This lend itself to a population study. So you're looking at changes in population, and from that now you are going to be analyzing dot maps, population pyramids, or choropleth maps for a particular location. And as we had made mention previously about the food processing industries, we definitely are able to look at industrial location as well as the benefits and problems associated with selected industries. And those would be the industries that are specified in the syllabus. So we're talking about fishing, we're talking about forestry, we're talking about bauxite industries, we're talking about food processing. So we can select anywhere from the syllabus as it relates to those industries. All right, now a very important component of the syllabus, I mean this SBA rather, and that is what we have at the very front of the SBA, and that's our introduction. And this is our overview as to what exactly we are presenting in the SBA. So if somebody take up the research paper, take up the project, just by reading the introduction, they should be able to determine what the SBA is all about. Now, there are two very, very important details that must be included in the introduction, and that is one, the justification for the study, and that is why are you doing it? Why have you set out to conduct a study as it relates to rivers? What is the reason? And I know a lot of time as students, we like to say that, okay, because Miss said that we are supposed to do the study, or it is necessary for us to do the SBA, but that's not the reason that CXC want at all. They want us to think as geographers and try to justify as to why exactly you have actually chosen such a study. So if we look at this example here, it is on rivers. And the reason for conducting such a study as presented here is to examine the fluvial river features that are associated with the river valley, the Wogwater River Valley, so that comparisons can be made to the features of typical rivers. So you would have read about the river features in your textbook. You would have studied them. You know what they look like in terms of the different diagrams. So now you want to embark upon a field study in order to compare what you would have read or what you would have studied with what is actually out there in the field. So that's a justification for the study there. So in doing so, you would be able to compare the different features along the river's course. Another reason for selecting the area of study as well is it may be related to the accessibility of the river or proximity to where your school is located. And any of those reasons can be presented as justification as to why you actually selected the topic as well as why you actually selected that particular study area. So once again, the introduction is 2 marks and we don't want to throw it away. So we want to ensure that we actually include the justification for the study in that section. My last tip here is that the introduction should not be used to define terms such as what is a river. We really don't want that at all. Or what is a river valley. Remember, for the introduction, you're saying what the SBA is about. And most importantly, you're giving a reason as to why this particular area was actually chosen for study. All right. Now we're moving right along and we are looking at that component of the SBA that draw on your artistic skills now. So we're looking at whether or not you are able to produce maps that represent the study area. Now, as it relates to the requirements of the SBA, you are to produce 2 maps. And the first map relates to the map of the territory. So we're talking about Jamaica, as well as you are supposed to produce a map of the site. And that is exactly where you actually visited for research to collect your primary data. Now, the details are important as it relates to the map. So for map 1, you ought to ensure that you highlight the location of study, as it says right here. And apart from highlighting that location of study, you must make reference to a particular point that everybody is supposed to know. And those well-known points tend to be an airport, or it could be the highest mountain peak in the country, or the capital city. So you have to put on these important features so that you're able to give some sort of relative location of your study area. So somebody who has never ventured into the area that you actually collected data should be able to look at map 1 and be able to determine the approximate location from these areas that they possibly know to your area of study. So these reference points are very important. Now for map 2, you are presenting a detailed map of the study area and characteristics of the immediate environment. So on such a map, you want to ensure that you have your elevation present. You want to ensure that you have included your roads. You want to ensure that you have included your water courses, especially if it's a study on rivers or coasts. You want to ensure that you have made mention of something as it relates to land use. And most importantly, we want to ensure that this map is on a large scale so that you're able to see the different features. So we're talking about maps that are 1 to 25,000 or 1 to 10,000. So if you were supposed to compare map 2 with map 1, map 2 is on a much larger scale when it compares to map 1. So we are going to look at a few maps in order to determine if they're okay for that 4 marks that is given over to this component of the SBA. Now, those maps, very, very important. We must ensure that they have a title, they must have a key, there must be a scale, there must be a border, there must be a compass. Very important in order to get that 4 marks. Also, we have to ensure that those maps are neat, that they're accurate. We don't want to draw a country that's not the shape at all. We want to ensure that the symbols that we use, those are the conventional symbols that are applied to all maps. And very important as well, we want to ensure that the symbols that are used in the key, it actually matches the symbols that are used on the map itself. So very important. So let's look at some of the maps that we have gone over the years. All right, some of these are from my very own students. All right, now we have a map here of Jamaica. So this would have been an example of our map 1. And if we look at this map, I mean, the drawing is not bad at all. But then if we look carefully, we would realize that there is actually no reference point. So there is nothing there to say, okay, this is Blue Mountain Peak, or this is the river, or this is the capital of the country. And as such, we're not able to give the relative location from the study area to that reference point. We are not able to pick that up at all. So as a result of that, this map would not get the maximum marks at all. Let's look at another one. Again, if we look at this map, nice and neat. However, there is no reference point there. So we're not seeing Blue Mountain Peak there. And there was some attempt to label the capital of Jamaica. However, if we look closely, that Kingston is not in the correct location, in the correct position at all. Because if we know that the capital should be somewhere right here. And they have actually shaded the entire parish. All right, but yet still in the key, they have it labeled as country capital. All right, so we have to be very careful when it comes on to those little details. Again, another map, and there's no reference point included, and the symbols on the map, they don't match the key at all. So if we look at the shading here, parish of study, we're seeing a line in the symbol, but then when we look at the key, look at the map itself, these are actually polygons. So this should have been a polygon here, like a little square with the shading, the white shading here to suggest parish of study. And for other parishes, again, we should have had a polygon here, like a square, to suggest that these are actually shapes and not a line. All right, so the key right there is somewhat misleading. Here's another example. So we have what I would consider to be a beautiful map as it relates to how it's drawn, but a very, very important element is missing, and that is the study area. So if we look at this map, we are not sure where the study area is at all because it was not included on the map. All right, so sometimes in an attempt to finish up the SB and to make sure that everything is in, we tend to forget these very important elements. We have an example of a map here that has all the components. So if we look at it, there is a border there. There's a title. The scale is intact. The key seems to be good because we have the study area located here. And if we look at the map as well, there is some sort of direction as it relates to the study area. So on the map, you're seeing 2 Morant Bay. So that gives us some sort of relative location of the study area. And if we look at the left here, we're seeing to Kingston. So just by looking at the directional arrows here, we're able to determine exactly where the study area is. So it's somewhere between Kingston and Morant Bay. All right, very important. Here is another example of a map, and this again is map 2. Very nicely done and nice and neat. And we would have realized that the roads are nicely drawn. We have a title there, the border is intact, the key is there, the scale is there. So no doubt this map would have attained the full marks. All right, so once again, I want to encourage everybody to take their time, draw the map, and just ensure that all the elements are included. Now, we're on to another very important component of the SBA, and that's the methodology. So once again, we're looking at 4 more marks. And based on the syllabus, we want to ensure that we have actually answered 3 very important questions. Where will data be collected? When will data be collected? And how it will be collected? So we're actually getting marks for stating the answers to those questions. So very important. We want to ensure that we state where primary and secondary data were collected in our methodology. We want to give the precise location of the study. We also want to state when the data was collected. So we want to include both the time as well as the day. So very, very important. And we want to describe the methods used to collect data in a sequence, in a logical sequence. All right. So we want to, so if there were several things that were done in field, you want to ensure that you have detailed them in, proper sequencing. So would have gotten 1 mark up here, another mark here for stating when, and another 2 marks for detailing how data was actually collected. All right, now just to give you some suggestions as it relates to methods that can be used out in the field. We know that observation is definitely one of our central methodologies that can be used as it relates to any topic. We tend to use questionnaires, especially for human topics, as well as the interview, as well as when it relates to secondary data. There are so many government entities in Jamaica that we can access as it relates to the different topics that we have in the syllabus. I mean, we have NEPA, who is able to actually give us secondary information as it relates to the physical topics. Then, of course, we have use of the internet, we have our texts, we have maps that we can use. Now, since 2020, we have the CSEC has made provisions for other methodologies that, I mean, in the past they were accepted, but then COVID has actually amplified the use of these methodologies, and I want to encourage us as students to make use of them. Some of them are very time they're efficient in terms of time. You're actually able to get the data in a shorter period of time. You can access persons who you would not be able to access before. So we just want to encourage you to make use of the non-conventional ways of actually acquiring data. So what are we talking about? We're talking about survey tools. We're talking about our Google Forms that we would have been exposed to from COVID, or Survey Monkey, or use of social media, telephone, virtual platforms, emailing. So we can send out a whole host of emails to different persons if it is that we want them to answer a particular questionnaire. So we don't necessarily have to go into the field in order to get that data at all. We can very much send out that questionnaire to the different persons that we have in our contacts. We also are able to use the Google Earth, very, very important tool there, and Google Maps as it relates to trying to analyze the location of our different study area. Now, what does the methodology look like in our SBA? So once again, I tell you that we're actually answering 3 little questions in order to get that 4 marks. So when was data collected? We have to ensure that we are very precise in saying that, okay, it was collected on a particular day, as well as we want to also include the time of day that data was collected. And for some river studies, that is so very important, or some coastal study for that matter. Time of day is very, very important, because, for example, what if we're doing a study on the coast and we're looking at the wave characteristics? Time of day would have really been of key importance. The where is also important, so we want to give some information there as to where exactly data was collected, and if possible, we give some sort of reference to the map that we would have included in our location of study. Beyond that, we actually have our how, and as we said before, we're actually looking at the different methods that were undertaken in the field, and we're detailing that in order to attain our 2 marks. All right, so that's an example of our methodology there. Now, as it relates to questionnaire design, I find that students tend to use the questionnaire quite a bit. So in actually designing your questionnaire, I just want to give you a few tips as it relates to that. Now, the first thing that you want to do is to decide on the information you need. in order to achieve your aim. So we really don't want you to go off tangent as it relates to the different questions that you put in your questionnaire. So we want you to keep it short, no more than 10 questions. And if you go beyond 10 questions, chances are persons may not spend the time to complete it. And we want to ensure that we get all the information that we want. So we want to keep it as simple as possible and as short as possible. But at the same time, we ensure that all the questions are actually relevant to the study. Very, very important. All right. Now, also in administering the questionnaire, we have to consider our sample size. And that relates to the number of persons we are actually going to be included in the study. So we really don't want to ask too fewer persons when the study area is actually a large area. Neither do we want to ask too many persons so that we actually take a very long time in order to get back the responses. All right. Now, how we actually select our sample is very important as well. We want to exclude any sort of bias. So if you're doing a study, for example, in your very school, you don't want to give the questionnaire only to your friends because they are accessible or they are convenient. But if it is that you want a spread of responses, then you may have to consider whether or not you're gonna actually ask some first formers, another set from grade 8 or second form, another set from third form. So you definitely want to consider the type of technique that you will be using in order to sample. All right, so very, very important. Now, another very important aspect of the SBA is our presentation of data. How do we present the information that we have collected? Now, this component of the SBA actually lend itself to you creating illustrations. And that is what you're actually getting the marks for. You're getting the marks for how accurate you are in terms of the illustrations, as well as the variety that you actually use throughout the SBA. Now, CXC wants you to use at least 3 types of presentation in your SBA. So we're actually talking about the use of a pie chart, the use of a table, the use of photographs, the use of diagrams, sketches, any of the above. But we want to ensure that there is some sort of variety there. And most importantly, we want to ensure that the information that you have actually presented, it is accurate. Now, to highlight some of the important elements of those illustrations, the pie charts, the line graphs, the bar graphs, the histograms, they must have a title. The axes, they must be labeled. A key must be included, especially when it's the pie chart or the bar graph. And we want to ensure that at the bottom of it, those illustrations, we have a source there. The photographs and the diagrams that we actually include in the SBA, they should not become copied from any secondary sources. So once again, if you're doing a study on hazards, we can't go on the internet and download photographs that were taken taken by the cleaner or any other source. Those photographs must be related to your own picture that you actually took out there in the field. So those secondary sources will not be credited at all. Now, very, very important, we want to ensure that those illustrations, they are actually integrated in the text or integrated in the description of findings that you have presented in the SBA. So you don't want to present a SBA where all the illustrations are in one section of the SBA and the text somewhere else. You must be integrating the illustrations with the data as you go along. Reference must be made to all the illustrations that you use. So right throughout the SBA, you must be saying, okay, figure 1 shows a bar graph showing the number of persons that yada, 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 whatever it is. So you want to ensure that if it is that you used 6 illustrations in the SBA, somewhere in the SBA or somewhere in the description of findings, you have made a reference to every one of those 6 illustrations. All right, very, very important. Immediately below each illustration, include a clear caption number. So you must ensure that you are actually numbering each of the illustration as you go along. And in caps I have here again, do not separate the illustrations from the description of data. So we don't want you to bunch up all the illustrations in one section of the SBA, and then you start making reference to them further on in the SBA. We want you to do both as you go along. All right, so here is an example. So at the top there, you have a little bit of information as it relates to the site, and then reference would have been made to the illustration that we have down there at the bottom of the page. All right, and if we read throughout, we would have actually seen some reference made to plate 2 here. See plate 2. All right, very important. So that integration of the illustration and the text is very, very important. Now, from time to time, we find that students are not making the proper reference to the illustration, so we want to ensure that you do it. There is the incorrect use of illustrations. So sometimes we use a pie chart when that should not be the illustration that we use at all. Probably a histogram would have better represented the data that you have. Or the photographs are not labeled. So you took a nice photograph out there in the field, but you didn't spend the time to label it. CXC want to ensure that whatever you are making reference to, you actually label it on the photograph. Then most importantly, let me go back to it. A lot of times when we create the graphs, we don't label the axes at all. So we don't label the x-axis to say what the x-axis is showing, or the y-axis to say what the y-axis is showing. And we're going to look at a few examples here. So here we have a pie chart. Now, a lot of times you get pie charts looking like this. The pie charts actually have no illustration as it relates to what percentage is actually in each sector of the pie chart. So yes, there's a key there to show that some of it is stone, some of it is pebbles, some of it is sand. But what percentage of the whole is stone? What percentage of the sample relates to pebbles? Or what percentage relates to sand? So if it is that you're using a pie chart in your SBA, ensure that you have actually included the percentage on that pie. All right, so if it is a human study and you went out in the field and you collected information, make certain that when you actually put the pie chart together, you actually have the percentage included there. All right. All right, let me go back to this. Now, sometimes we collect data and we have responses as it relates to yes and no questions. And based on the respondents, we would have probably gotten a response that where 100% of the sample said yes. Now, if that is the case, we need not represent that at all. Because if 100% said yes, there's really nothing to show. Remember that a pie chart actually shows differences in response. You have different parts to that pie, which is why it's called a pie chart. So if it is that 100% of the sample said yes, then we really need not show that at all. You would have said that in your description, that 100% said yes, they use the river for washing, but we need not include that as an illustration at all. All right. Now, here's another example of bar charts that we tend to produce. And I know we look on them in our SB and we say, yes, man, this look perfect. But when we really look at it, we realize that there are some missing elements there. And if we look at this, there was no title. Title is very important, and we have to ensure that we include it. On the axes, they weren't labeled, and without the labeling on the axis, we really don't know what it's showing at all. So we must say number of males, number of females, or percentage of respondents. All right. And last but not least, we must include the labeling for our x-axis there. All right, very, very important information there. Now at the bottom, remember I said that we are supposed to include a caption for all of our illustrations. And if it is that we have 6 illustrations in the study, all of them must be given a number. All right, very important. Now again, from time to time, we tend to get photographs that are taken nicely, looking lovely in the study, but we really don't know what the features are. We don't know what the features are highlighted. So we have to make certain that that photograph actually have all the labels and annotations that we have actually made a reference to. So here's a better illustration of what the photograph should look like if we do intend to actually use those in our study. So we have the cliff nicely labeled here. We have the cave labeled. We have the stump labeled here, and these are coastal features. I know you know these features. We have a directional arrow showing our destructive wave, and we have another arrow showing our wave cut platform. So just about everything that we would have made mention of in our description of findings, we make certain that we actually include them on the photograph. All right. And last but not least, at the very bottom of our photograph here, we must have a caption giving the number as well as stating exactly what is shown in the illustration. Very, very important. Now, what is wrong here? Remember, Mrs. Russell says that you are not supposed to include any sort of secondary diagrams. Anything that was taken from the internet will not be credited. So we shouldn't bother to waste time to include them in our study at all. All right, so that's the end of the presentation of data. So once we pay attention to all those details, then we should be able to get the maximum marks. Now, another area that I call this the meat of the SBA. This is the part where we're getting a whole lot of marks for, and it relates to the analysis of data. Now, what exactly are we doing in this section? This is where we are providing an explanation for the data that was presented. So after you have presented the data, you really need to analyze what it's saying. So in doing that, you are going to be giving some sort of reasons for the trends. What trend did you pick up? What pattern did you pick up? And if you picked up any trends, or if you picked up any patterns, what is it saying? Or what's the reason for those trends or patterns? Then you want to ensure that you make some sort of reference to the secondary information that you would have read from a textbook. Remember, from the very beginning of the presentation, I had said to you that one of the first things that we're supposed to do as it relates to getting information or carrying out the SBA rather, you would have had to do some background information. So this is where now you're making use of that background information. You're trying to integrate what you would have learned in the classroom or from the text or from the internet with the data that you have actually collected. Very important. Now in this section, we want to ensure that the information that you have actually presented, they are under appropriate subheadings. And this kind of give you an edge in terms of organization, so that you don't get too long-winded in terms of what you present, or you haven't jumbled up your findings all over the place. But so when you actually use different subheadings, you're able to, focus your thoughts and get everything out on the appropriate heading. So if it is that you're doing a study, for example, on coastal features, and you're looking at how wave action or factors have actually influenced those coastal features, you want to ensure that, you actually come up with subheadings where you can actually focus your thoughts or focus the data that you have actually collected. So the use of those subheadings, they're very important. Now, as I said, the analysis of data, this is where you are actually presenting your illustrations as well as you're giving some sort of reasons and explanation as it relates to what you have presented. So both tend to go hand in hand. So you're not just only presenting the data or showing your illustrations or presenting the data that you have there, but you're explaining as you go along as it relates to the different features. You and here's another example as it relates to ensuring that you have actually focused your thoughts. So here is a subheading here. So this study is actually looking at the different factors influencing location of a particular industry. And the factors that are made mention here are the physical factors. So, you would have included a little subheading here, physical factors. And from that now, you sort of explain what is happening. Apart from that, you're ensuring that you would have made a reference to your illustration, and then you show your illustration, and then you make certain that you actually have your annotations there, your labeling. So you have quite a bit to undertake in order to ensure that you actually have data that is presented nicely and explained properly throughout the SBA. All right, so everything works hand in hand. Here is another example. Again, I call it a marriage. You want to marry the illustrations with the information that you're presenting. Again, we don't want it to bunch up all the illustrations in one area and then the information or the explanation in another area. You want to ensure that they go hand in hand. So illustration, then explanation, illustration, then explanation. And if you're still not sure, go to your textbook as reference. I'm quite certain that any chapter that you turn to in any of your textbooks, you would have seen where the illustrations are followed by the explanation or the presentation of any other topics. There isn't a section that exclusively shows the illustrations and then the text in another area. So we want to ensure that they're actually hand in hand. Another section of the SBA that goes hand in hand with the analysis of data is the quality of data. Now, that data that you actually collected, whether it be primary or secondary data, you want to ensure that it's accurate. So for example, if you went out in the field and you did a study with 30 persons, you collected data from 30 persons, you want to ensure that you actually count them up properly and you present them properly so that when you are actually including it in the SBA, you're not getting figures that tend to be off, because that is where it will actually show up. So we must make sure that everything adds up. You also want to ensure that the data presented is appropriate. So again, you want to look back at your aim to ensure that everything that you do in the SBA relates to the aim that you started out with. And most importantly, you want to ensure that it's everything that you have, it's relevant. So you don't want to include anything that is not relevant at all, because once again, we have a word limit of 1,000 words. And once you start veering off tangent, then I'm very certain that you're going to get well over that 1,000 words that you're supposed to have. Now, another section there is the communication of information. How well did you communicate all that data that you have presented? And I can tell you this component is very difficult to get the maximum 4 marks, because if you look at your syllabus, you would have realized that in order to get that maximum of 4 marks, you would have had to have no grammatical errors. So you would have to ensure that all your I's are dotted and all your T's are crossed in order to get that 4 marks. So I'm going to encourage you to read through the SBA, read it through again, have somebody else read it in order to get the SBA being error-free so that you can get that 4 marks. Now we're on to the final 2 sections of the SBA, and that relates to our conclusion. Now, I know this is the happy part of the SBA, because it suggests that you're almost finished. And from time to time, we think that when we give a conclusion, we must say that, okay, everything that you set out to do, it was actually achieved. So we tend to start off the conclusion by saying that, okay, my aim was achieved. Everything that I set out to do, it was done. But this is not what CXC want at all in the SBA. They actually want you to give a brief summary of the main points of your research. So I always say to my students, you would have done summary writing in English. This is where you actually apply your summary writing skills. So you're going to look back at the main points that you have included in your SBA. And we're talking about the analysis of data, the description of findings, everything that you have presented in those sections. You're looking back through and you are presenting all those points as a summary. You must ensure that those points that you have actually presented, they actually relate to your aim. So you don't want to put information in your conclusion that you didn't speak about in the SBA. You don't want to include any new information in your conclusion. So again, make certain that everything that you may mention here is it was actually said in the study itself. You may also include limitations of the study. So what exactly did you encounter throughout the study? Is it a problem as it relates to accuracy in using certain equipment, or was it that the time of day wasn't appropriate, but you have the latitude to actually include some sort of solution here? All right. But most importantly, you want to ensure that everything that you have in your conclusion, it was made mention of in the SB itself. So this is where you're actually getting your 4 marks. All right. So very, very important. And so once again, I'm saying it here. Do not say that the aim was achieved or the SB was a success. We like to say that. But what we want here is some sort of conclusion or some sort of summation of what you have done. All right. Now we have an example here, and if we do a summary that is succinct, one that includes all the main points in our SB, then we may end up with 2 short paragraphs. Again, we want to ensure that all information that we put in the conclusion, it was something that was made mention of in either the description of findings or in somewhere in the analysis there. But you must not include any information that is new. All right, now that's almost the SBA. So we're almost at the end of the 40 marks here. But we have one other tiny mark that is actually given over to the bibliography. And once again, sometimes we tend to throw away this mark because we didn't pay special attention to how we actually cite those texts that we use. Remember, we said that we're actually using secondary sources in our SBA. So we must be able to cite at the end of our study exactly what and what was actually used. Now, for the purpose of the SBA, you want to ensure that you actually have at least 2 recognized texts using MLA or APA format. And you may not be probably acquainted with the MLA or the APA style. Your teacher would have guided you on a particular type of format, but despite the format that you actually use, you must ensure that the list that you have there is actually in alpha order according to the author's last name. So if you look at this example here, we have 3 texts and they are arranged according to alphabetical order. So we have Guinness first, and then we have Robinstein, and then we have Wilson. So you have the author's last name here. This text, which is one of our main texts, there are several authors that have actually written the book. So we use the French term here, étal, to suggest that there are other authors there. We include the name of the text, geography for CSEC, and we underline it there. We include our publisher, which is Nelson Thornes, or place of publication and the year of publication. Very, very important. And we actually do that for all the texts that we have actually utilized within the SBA. Another example, we have Wilson, followed by the first initial. Then we have the name of our text, the name of the publisher, which is Oxford, and the place of publication, which is United Kingdom, and the year of publication, 2005. Now, there are other sources that we can actually include in our bibliography, especially if it formed an integral part of our data collection. So for example, you actually did a study along the Rio Grande River, then it would mean that a topographic map or the sheet map would have been very important as it relates to trying to locate the area, as well as probably some sort of analysis. So you may want to include that in your bibliography. So you have to ensure that it is cited properly. So you have the Rio Grande, Portland, Jamaica, which would have been the name of the sheet map, followed by the scale, the sheet number, and the year it was produced. Now, this information, all this information, you can actually get from the map itself. So you have the title, the scale. At the bottom of the map, you'd have seen the sheet number, and the year of publication is definitely on the map. If it is that you actually used internet sources in your study, sources, that would have bolstered your analysis, for example, because remember, we are explaining trends and patterns. So you may want to make mention of some secondary sources. Again, you have to cite those properly. So if it is, for example, from a particular agency, the database of a particular agency, I'm using NEPA here as an example, you would have had National Environment and Planning Agency, the name of the website or the URL given here, the link, as well as the date that you actually accessed the website, because that's very important, because from time to time, information that is on the internet actually changes, and you want to ensure that you actually make reference to the date that you actually collected the data from that source. And you also include exactly what you took from the site. And in this case, it's the watershed maps of Yalas River. All right, so once again, the bibliography will include a number of sources, but very important, you must include 2 texts. And apart from those 2 texts, you want to include other sources that were very central to the SBA. Now, if it is that your SBA or your methodology relied very heavily on the use of methodologies such as the questionnaire or interview schedule, you may want to include that in the appendix, which is at the back of the SBA. So you would have actually included a clean sample of the questionnaire or the interview schedule, the one that you would have used to interview, for example, an operations manager at an industry. So you would have included a sample of it there at the back. If it is that you want to include photographs that showed some sort of data collection method, not that you have to, but if it was central to your SBA, then you would actually want to include that in the appendix. And if it is that you used secondary information, such as statistical information, that lend itself to some sort of data collection, you actually use the information there, then you would actually include that in your appendix as well. So for example, if you're doing a study on population and you use the statin, for example, for their population census, you could actually put a sample of the census here, or put a sample of the source here at the back of the SBA in the appendix. Now, I have actually saved the beginning of the SBA for last. And again, as I had said in the beginning of the presentation, the content page is possibly one of the easiest section of the SBA to complete, but we tend not to get the 1 mark here at all, because from time to time we tend to exclude the page numbers, or the page numbers that we have, they're not correct at all. So when you actually look at, for example, for the aim of study, it's actually on page 5 and not page 3. So we have to pay very special attention to that. And I know the reason for that sometimes. Sometimes we tend to give the cover page a number itself, and we really don't realize that the content or the different subheadings here, they are not aligned to the page numbers in the SBA. So we have to make certain that this is the last thing that we do, and all the pages agree with the different components of the SBA, because we want that 1 mark, definitely. So from time to time, we get content pages that look like this. So you have all the components nicely outlined here, but the page numbers are not there at all. All right, now my final words is the SBA can be quite a bit to undertake. And for some students, it might get overwhelming, but for me, just start, and try to pick away each day. Give over an hour or two to the completion of the GeoSB, because it requires a lot, requires a whole lot of focus. You have to be drawing, you have to be creating charts and diagrams and sketches, as well as you are actually writing and explaining. So it does include a whole lot. So I just want to encourage you to, to keep on top of things. Ensure that if it is that it's a group SBA, everybody in the group actually has an assigned task, and you make certain that everybody is on top of things. All right, set deadlines. You don't want to wait until Miss or Sir asks for the SBA. But if it is that you are working actively on the SBA, then you're supposed to have a personal deadline. So you're supposed to say that, listen, by the 15th of February, I should be done with the analysis. I should be finished with the presentation of data. The aim should have been there. I should have completed drawing the maps. The cover page should be there, so such that you're not cramming too much in at any given time. Now, when you're finished all of that, you don't have to wait on your teacher to mark the SBA. You can grab your syllabus, download it, and you go through what you have, and you ensure that all that the syllabus outlines as it relates to the different components, you actually have it in your own SBA, so that you can actually score those maximum marks. I am always available to give any sort of help to any student that may require additional help as it relates to either getting started where the SBA is concerned, or if you just want a second opinion as it relates to what you're really doing, then I can be reached at k.brown-russell@cdown.edu.jm. And I'm going to end here with a quote by Walt Disney. And he says, the way to get started is to quit talking and begin doing. And that's so very important, because I know a whole lot of time we spend talking, and we're not getting any work done. So we have until March to complete those SBAs. So we need to get on it in order to get those 40 marks. All right. So thank you very much for listening. I am hoping that we wrote down all the notes as it relates to the SBA, so that we can get that grade 1. So that grade 1 we set out for, it actually starts with the completion of the SBA. So thank you very much, NEPA, for having me.
Wonderful. Right. So some important reminders as well from that presentation. I know that that was a mouthful. Be reminded that the presentation will be uploaded to the NEPA's YouTube page, and you can find that at NEPA Jamaica. And I know that she has given us a lot to go through and to think about, but some of the important things, 3 of the most important things that I got from her presentation is that you have to select your topic. You have to ensure that the data you can actually collect data on the topic that you have chosen, and it actually matches back with the syllabus, because before you can go into all of the nitty-gritty and the analysis and everything, you have to ensure that these things are top-notch first, right? Again, her email address is k.brown-russell@cdown.edu.jm in the event that you have any questions. And you can definitely access the NEPA's website, that is www.nepa.gov.jm, to get any information or to get as much content as you want. You can also, if you're not seeing what you want on the website, you can email the documentation center, right? And you can also send us information, or you can ask us questions on our different social media platforms at NEPA Jamaica. We're on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter, and we can help you access that information as well. Now we're just going to move into our polls at this time, because we have enjoyed all of those presentations, and we are just going to do a quick poll on the second half of our day, the water quality presentation, the coral reef presentation, and the geography SBA tips that we just finished a while ago. So if you look on your screens, there are going to be some polls coming up. I'm just going to give you like 30 seconds for each section to answer as to whether or not you found these presentations helpful at this time before we move into our question and answer section. It's wonderful. So I take it that you have all completed that small poll for us. Now I'm just going to open the floor to persons who have questions at this time. For persons who have air quality questions, I'm just going to ask that you submit those questions in the chat, and we will compile them and send them to you. But for persons who have other questions relating to the other topics that were done, I'm just going to ask you to use the raise hand feature at the bottom of your screen. And when you're acknowledged, just open your mic, acknowledge yourself, right, and the school that you're representing, and ask your questions. We have the different presenters online and here with us to answer your questions. And for those who do not have a mic, you can submit your questions in the chat as well. Raising their hand. And I am not seeing any questions in the chat. I take it that the presenters have done a wonderful job, and everybody here is going to get a grade 1, correct? So before we go, I must say congratulations to Shantoy Nevers and Shandiz, I hope I pronounced your name correctly, Shandiz Thompson. They have won themselves phone cards, right, for answering the questions, what is monitoring and what is pollution. And I'm going to give away another prize. So the first person who can answer in the chat as to what are 2 types of corals, they will win themselves a prize as well. I'm still giving you the opportunity to raise your hand or to put your question in the chat if you have any. So the question again is, what are 2 types of coral reefs? I know that Miss Trudy and Campbell spoke extensively on what are coral reefs. All right, so we have a winner here. Ooh, that was quick. So this is Kay Robinson. I'm not sure if it's a student or a teacher. Can you just indicate for me? She said finger coral and brain coral. Oh, Shandy is there on the ball, man. I really hope I'm pronouncing your name correctly. You're on the ball, and she's a student. Wonderful. So thank you so much for your participation. And Shandiz, you won yourself again another prize. Shandiz, I believe in you know, you're getting the one, man, because you look like you're taking notes. You're going to get that one. I believe in you. And I believe that everybody online as well will get their one. Also, you please look out for this presentation or this seminar rather on the NEPA's YouTube page in the event that you did not get the opportunity to write down all of the notes, especially from Mrs. Russell, who gave you an extensive explanation and review on how to get your SBAs done, right? So everybody else gave you information which was good, but then you need a structure in terms of how you're supposed to put that information together, right? We have, since there are no questions, because I'm still not seeing any raised hand, and I am not seeing any questions in the chat, I'm just going to ask my technical support team to put up one last set of polls. So we're just going to give you some opportunities to answer some general questions. Right, so these questions you're going to rate from 1 to 5 on the presentations, whether or not they were useful and interesting. You're going to, if the duration of the sessions were right, was the session well structured, was the information presented to you useful, and the overall session, if it met your purpose for participating. I truly hope it met your purpose this morning for participating, or this afternoon rather, as you gear up yourselves to get that one in your geography CSEC exam and getting that full marks, or maybe close to that full marks, because getting 40 out of 45 isn't bad. I guess most of you would like to get 44, if that's possible. So as we go through those polls, just giving you some time to go through the polls before we wrap up. All right, so I'm understanding that you're doing the last poll now. I hope everyone participated in those polls, because we need to know whether or not we're effective in teaching you or in guiding you with your SBAs. And we would like to know, you know, if it works, if it's working right now. We had some lovely presentations today. So as we're closing out, I must give thanks and gratitude to NEPA. Before we wrap up, my apologies, we have an evaluation that's on screen right now. It's in the chat. Okay, so the evaluation is in the chat. We're asking you as well to participate in that. The link is in the chat, so I'm just asking everyone just to click on that link and complete your evaluation. So as we close out our session today, I must say thanks to NEPA, and specifically the Documentation Centre officers who put this together for our students and our teachers. Again, I know that it was very effective in terms of how you structure your SBA and knowing where you can get information from. I must give thanks to our presenters, Ms. Charlotte Thomas, Ms. Jodian Minot Marston, Ms. Shannalee Thomas, Ms. Safia Roden, Ms. Trudian Campbell, and Mrs. Kenisha Brown Russell for their presentations. Just a small reminder again, we will be uploading on the NEPA YouTube page for those who did not get the opportunity to join in on time, or for those who need more in-depth information from the presentations. If you need additional information, you can send us a message on Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram at NEPA Jamaica. You can visit our website for additional information. That is www.nepa.gov.jm. And I must give thanks to the persons online, the students and the teachers who have been with us from 9 a.m. this morning to get the necessary information for the completion and the marking of the SBAs for those who will be doing so. So I must tell you thanks for sitting, standing, walking, and listening to us this morning as we give the various presentations. So from me, again, Alicia Barrett, the community animator here at NEPA, thank you all for joining us today, and I hope that you have a wonderful afternoon.